your company for the next few hours.
You are not going to believe the company.
This company.
You're going to bankrupt your mama's company?
At least I have the radio to keep me company.
On 93.5 and 107.5, The Fan.
Heidi Ho on a Thursday. Today's Thursday, right, guys? Is that right?
Yes. We're quickly becoming your digital assistants over here.
I'm telling you, man, like there's some weeks. Do you ever have these weeks where your days are thrown off the whole week? Like you know what I mean? You're like, sometimes it's great because you are a day behind. And so you're like, oh my gosh, we're further along than I thought. Then other weeks I get it where I keep thinking like I keep feeling like today's Wednesday. So I guess that's good, right? For me.
In terms of your travel schedule, but in terms of the workday mindset for the average Joe, I feel like you want it to be further in the week. I
just had like one of those weeks where it's hard to get like different stuff is popping up on me every day, right? So it's hard to get a hold of. My life's spiraling out of control.
Clearly, you didn't watch Radford USC Upstate last night. I mean, that's where you really needed to be. That would have brought
that's
stability.
South Carolina Upstate, right?
Yes.
Do we know what town that's in? Are we going to guess?
Columbia.
That's not a bad guess, but Columbia is a little bit further mid-state.
Okay.
I'm going to go with Anderson. Can you look this up, Eddie Garrison? Because what do we do on this program, Jimmy?
We entertain and educate.
True. We more educate and entertain. The entertain part is what we're working on. But I'm going to guess that South Carolina Upstate is in Anderson, South Carolina is my guess.
Both of you are incorrect.
Do you have the first letter for me, please?
Yep.
What is it?
S.
Spartanburg, South Carolina.
That was actually going to be my second guess.
Yes.
Is it Spartanburg?
Correct.
I don't know if you know, but Spartanburg and Anderson are basically the same town. They
is
are.
that
I'm
just so
serious.
you can be correct?
What's that?
Is that just so you can be politically correct here?
They're right by Clemson. So, like, literally on the signs, it's like Spartanburg. Anderson Spartanburg's considered. It's like, I don't know, Anderson and Pendleton. You know what I mean? It's kind of the same thing.
There's a big BMW manufacturing facility in Spartanburg.
That is exactly correct. That is exactly correct. That's why the Greenville Airport now is fabulous. And if you're going to go to a Clemson game, I suggest you fly. My name is Jake Corey, by the way. That is Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison is our geographic whiz here. He has all kinds of geographic information inside that 9 3/8 quarter head. And this is Corey & Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. A lot to talk about today that we will cover, and that is the Pacers in action tonight taking on the best team in the Western Conference, one of the best teams in the NBA, but without one of its best players in Karl Anthony Towns, but Indiana without one of its stars as well. Talking about Benedict Mathurin. We'll get to that over the course of the day. Last night, before we get to the Indiana game, I figured I would tell you guys this. I'm at dinner last night, and a woman walks up to me and says, "Are you Jake?" And I said, "I am." And she said, "Well, we actually have cooked together at the formerly Children's Bureau, now Firefly, fundraiser each year at the cook-off." And I said, "Oh, yeah." And it was one half of Dave and Ray, the popular singing duo that was huge in particular. They still play all the time, but they were really, really big when I was in college in particular. And she said, "I want to let you know that I listen to your show every day, and I really appreciate the way you guys broke down and explained what the different franchise tags are. And you made it very easy to figure out and understand what the Colts' decision was in franchise tagging Michael Pittman, what it meant to be an exclusive versus non-exclusive tag." And I think actually, Eddie, she credited you on that because you're the one that broke all that down.
Well, it's all inside this huge noggin, okay? So there you go.
I mean,
I'm glad my big melon can be used for something.
Yes, when you have a brain that is the size of
I don't know if it's a brain
watermelon.
or I don't know.
Well, it's well protected if it's not that big. But anyway, so it was nice of her to come up and say something, but I thought I would give you guys kudos for that. So after dinner then, went home, turned on the television, and watched Indiana and Minnesota. And look, you know, when I was watching it, I thought to myself, man, Minnesota does not look good at all. They've had a similar season to probably Indiana, but two things about the Indiana game last night. Number one, I thought Khalil Ware was outstanding. And not just because he had 26 points, not just because he shot at a high volume at 12 of 16, but he is showing more fluidity and movement. I think this guy could be kind of a steal in the NBA draft, quite frankly. Because I don't think he's on a lot of people's radar because he is – I mean, he's on the radar. He's going to be a top 15 pick probably, but it's part of that's because it's a dry draft, etc. There were questions about his motor coming in. I've mentioned that a gabillion times when he transferred from Oregon, but he was highly touted, he was a 5-star recruit. He was a national name coming into college. But one of the things that I think he has not shown a lot yet, because Indiana hasn't asked him to show it, and that when he goes through draft workouts and then into the NBA, that to me has been really impressive, is his fluidity and his movement around the basket from 5 feet out, not necessarily on the block. But he's got pretty quick moves around the basket itself and is starting to show more an array of them. Scoring in different ways, like he had kind of a hook yesterday. He could use his left. He can do a lot of things. He's a very, very talented guy, and it seems to just now kind of be coming to the forefront. Now, the other one that, if you're Indiana, you probably almost want to put a governor on at this point when you think about next year, is Mackenzie Mbako, because he's starting to finally show the offensive firepower that he has, and his shooting stroke is finally starting to come to him a little bit. And because he was already on the radar when it comes to national names, national scouting reports, etc., Mackenzie Mbako, to me, when I look at him, I think, okay, you don't want him to continue to flourish here and make this like strong late season Andre Patterson level push and put in great games, because then maybe he does get in the NBA radar, and Indiana then for next year is in a world of hurt, because I think that Khalil Ware's leaving, Malik Renew. We'll see what happens there if he returns. But what we know is this, and I don't think this was a huge surprise. Zach Ostman is going to join us coming up at the bottom of the hour. This will be a big topic of discussion. But Mike Woodson, we know, is coming back next year to Indiana, unless he chooses to leave, which I don't think is going to happen. And a couple of things here. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that that's a surprise to anybody that Mike Woodson is going to get another year in Bloomington. And you know what? Kudos to Mike Woodson in this regard. They have played better in the last 3 games. At a time when everybody else had kind of thrown in the towel on Indiana, at a time when everybody else was like, Indiana's absolutely done, this is it for them, they've kind of dug down and come together. And whether or not that's just because like Xavier Johnson came back and was on the floor and Woodson had told us that that's what you wanted to look for, whether or not, I don't, there are a million things you could look at. But the reality is this. The reality is that when it seemed as though the season was teetering and it was pointing towards an absolute fait accompli that they were going to have to make seismic changes within the basketball program, and the fan base had started to turn, and the Mike Woodson's coaching seat was so hot that they had to evacuate Assembly Hall because the fire alarms went off. During all of that, whether it's coincidence or not, the team itself seemed to kind of rally around. I'm not saying they rallied around him, but they have played better. And they have won 2 games where they were down big and came back and stuck together. And they won last night by methodically putting away Minnesota and building a big lead and just continuing to not relinquish it. So kudos to Mike Woodson. Kudos to Indiana in that regard. Now, what we don't know and what is hazy. And it wasn't a surprise that Mike Woodson, that it's come out now that he is going to get a 4th year unless he so chooses to leave. I don't think that's a huge surprise to anyone when you really think about the fact that you go on precedent. And the precedent is that if other coaches, many of which got probably 1 year past when the shelf life had expired, but if Archie Miller, for example, gets 4 years, then certainly Mike Woodson deserves 4 years. He went to the tournament for the first 2 of them, the 3 that he's been there. So that has to count for something. Now, I think there are a lot of Indiana fans that consider this kicking the can. Because when you look at next year, what Indiana now has done, if Mike Woodson thinks that the scrutiny this year was heavy or unfair, then if they don't come out and perform at a very high level next year, it's not going to take long before because people kind of backed away. Okay, fine, he's going to get a fourth year. If they get out to a slow start next year, or they are not coming together, or if Mbako transfers, if Ware goes pro, if Renew transfers, if they only get one guard, let's say, in the transfer portal, these are a ton of ifs. But if that's how it plays out, and I think there are a lot of Indiana fans that feel like that's how it's going to play out, then the voices and the smoke only get heavier and more thick. But for right now, you have to look at it and say, okay, they are assessing Mike Woodson based on the totality as opposed to the recency vacuum of this particular season. Now, I've had a lot of people say to me that it's an indictment on Scott Dolson, the athletic director at Indiana, that they are kicking the can. And while I am not here to say that it means that things are run with an iron fist or that there's any sort of an ultimatum on Scott Dolson, I don't know that. It would be irresponsible of me to say that factually. But I think I probably speak for a lot of Indiana fans in saying that when you have a guy that played basketball at Indiana and a guy that coached basketball in the NBA and a guy that played basketball in the NBA and has been around basketball for a very long time, and Quinn Buckner, who is the top level of the Board of Trustees of Indiana University, that capacity for Quinn Buckner is probably going to allow for, in Quinn Buckner's mindset, because of his basketball experience, a more broadband evaluation of things and patience. And in addition to that, one would assume he has a very close personal relationship with Mike Woodson. And that probably would allow and lend itself for Buckner to implore more patience or that extra year that Archie Miller got for Mike Woodson. Does that mean that that's mandated to Scott Dolson? I don't think that's true. But Scott Dolson has to be aware of that fact and thus kind of defer to the respects, wishes, and assessment and inventory of things that take place above his pay grade. And I respect all of that. I'm not saying Indiana fans necessarily are on board with that 100%. I'm simply speaking from a step back, objective observation and rational inventory of the entire assessment. And for right now, you have to say for the last 3 games, kudos to Mike Woodson, kudos to the way they played. And last night, Jimmy, Indiana was really good defensively, and Khalil Ware was really good around the basket. And Xavier Johnson made a couple of plays where you're like, wait, what? And Anthony Walker getting hurt, you hope the best for him. But it was a good night for Indiana last night, despite the overall temperament of the fan base getting the news about Mike Woodson, whether they're on board with that or whether they wanted to hear something else.
Yeah, it was a good night in a game that didn't matter. Like, this would have been great a month ago. Like, you could point to whatever you want to about where this team finally came together, and maybe it really was just because they didn't have Xavier Johnson and he mattered that much to this team. But it is your job as the top man to be able to prepare for that in general. And they were kind of caught with their pants down last year with the way they went about things in the portal. And whether that was because people looked at Trey Galloway and Xavier Johnson, by people I mean potential prospects in the portal last year, and thought, there's a lot of minutes that are valued to those guys, and you perhaps promised starters roles for them. Where's my playing time going to come from? Whether it was that, whether it was something more nefarious, I don't know. But the fact of the matter is they did not address guard a year ago in the portal. They failed to do that, and it was clear, regardless of how many different ways we looked at this team, where there were strengths and where there were glaring weaknesses. Have there been nights where Mbako has been head-scratching? Yes, but more often than not, he's been excellent. Khalil Ware, for the course of the entire season, has been excellent. He has been everything that he was touted to be, despite those that pointed out and said his work ethic, his motor, it doesn't translate in Oregon. How's it going to translate in Indiana? He has not been the problem. Malik Renew has not been the problem. It has been guard play. That has been their biggest weakness. And so now, yes, you are kicking the can down the road, and giving Mike Woodson one more year because you have respect for what he did the first 2 years, because that's measured against one of the worst coaches the last 30 years in Archie Miller, got a 4th year. And it's like, you know what? He didn't make any tournaments. He got a 4th year. Let's give Mike Woodson one more crack at it. I don't have a problem with that in theory, but there is part of me, both as the host/pundit as well as the fan, that has a great deal of respect for Mike Woodson, especially Mike Woodson, the player. And this is going to get far worse next year from the vitriol of this fan base and just the animosity from key voices if they have another year like this. Like, this should be a red flag, alarm bell going off moment for Mike Woodson. And it's hard for me to take that fully seriously when yesterday, in front of the press, when this losing streak started, prior to the winning streak they're now on, but when they had that big gap in January and February where it's like, man, this thing's really going off the rails, and you want to defend Mike Woodson. And then he goes up in front of the microphone yesterday. I'm not discussing with you guys my job. I shouldn't have to do that. I feel good in my skin in terms of my job. No, you should have to address that.
Here's why
you should have to address
it,
where your
Jimmy.
security is, because you're one of the highest paid people in the state at a university that matters. Yes,
Correct.
you should have to answer those questions.
I'll take it one step further. This is, to me, the thing that is perplexing and frustrating. And I know it's frustrating for Purdue fans right now that are tuning in, and they're like, look, we just won our 2nd straight Big Ten title. And I got to turn in and listen to these guys talk about a 60% winning percentage coach getting a 4th. I get it. I totally understand it. But it is the largest state in the university. Largest university in the state. And by numbers, to be honest with you, there may be others that have a larger enrollment because of the online stuff. But you get what I'm saying. Mike Woodson is and this is where he's wrong. Guys, I shouldn't have to discuss my job with you. I shouldn't have to answer these questions. You should, actually.
Yes.
Because you are a publicly paid employee of the state of Indiana. You are at a university that is a public university that has public dollars spent into it. And as a result of that, and I don't know, I'm sure there are probably auxiliary areas of income generation that pay Mike Woodson aside from but nonetheless, he is the face of, to a large extent, a public university. And so that is going to lend itself. Do you know why a college basketball coach makes, what is Mike Woodson's base salary? What's a base salary? 1.92? Is that what it is? I mean, there's all kinds of factors that go into what his actual compensation is. But this is what people fail to realize sometimes. Do you know why coaches and athletes get paid the amount they do? Twofold. Number one, because they work in a business that brings in a ton of revenue. So they are entitled to their cut. But a huge part of why you make what you do is because you are basically getting a stipend for putting up with the BS and probably the unfair nature of people wanting to know about and knowing about the security of your job. That's it. That's fine. You want to like not have people publicly asking you about the security of your job or assessing the nature of your job, then go work as an accountant for $110,000 a year.
About 4
I'm not discussing you guys my job. I shouldn't have to do that. I feel good in my skin in terms of my job.
Okay, if you feel good about it, then talk about it. My thing is this.
About $4.2 million per year when you add in all the marketing, all the outside stuff.
Right.
There was a nice piece in the Star earlier this week by Zach Ostman.
But what's his base compensation from the university? I think it's like $875,000 or $1 million, right? The reality is this. I'm not saying that he's wrong, per se, in feeling the way that he does, but he's wrong in speaking it out. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. It is startling to me. The most amazing thing to me about Mike Woodson, about a lot of coaches, is this. Mike Woodson coached in New York City. New York City. Now, there was a time where Jim Dolan of the New York Knicks that owns the New York Knicks prohibited a lot of the media from daily access to the team and covering them. Maybe Woodson was protected by that. I don't know. But there is no media market that is more ruthless, aside from maybe Philadelphia, than New York City. So Mike Woodson didn't just get baptism by fire on cutthroat media. Mike Woodson got baptism by, like, towering inferno. And if he thinks the Indianapolis media market is too hard on him, if he thinks the, like, 9 people that probably are regularly on an every game basis at every single game covering Indiana basketball are too hard on him, many of which their bread and butter is buttered by Indiana basketball and the access they get, he thinks that's hard? Where he is hurting himself is condemning that group. And indirectly, what I've always said about the media is whether athletes and coaches like this or not, the media is the liaison between those that are getting a lot of money to perform and those that are paying the money to watch them perform. And so when you condemn the media, you are essentially condemning the fans. Now, are there media members that ask moronic questions? Absolutely. And I totally understand
but that's why you
that
get
would
paid.
get tired.
That's why you get paid the way you do to deal
Correct.
with that.
That's correct.
It's not a shield that says you're above it.
That's
it's
correct.
why you're compensated.
In addition to that, I've always said this, Jimmy. I get tweets or texts or people on the street that tell me that I suck, that they don't like the way that my analogies are terrible, my questions are too long.
And that's just a message Eddie and I send you.
That's right. That's right. I'm just talking about within our internal chat, right? All those things, right?
Sure.
I don't always like it. I don't always handle it correctly. But then I remind myself that if my job is to be critical of or to offer critique of coaches and athletes, then in reality, it is only fair that I accept that back, because I can't ask of other people to accept something that I'm not capable of accepting myself. And it is amazing to me that Mike Woodson is, quite frankly, as like, he said he's comfortable in his skin. It's just so thin, though. Right?
Yes.
I mean,
as evidenced by the quotes last night.
Yes.
Among other things.
So what I'm getting at, long-winded and circuitously here, validating those that are critical of me, is that Mike Woodson could go a long way by just not being so defiant. That would go such a long way. I think that human nature dictates that the way that, like, people feel that you are handling them is the way that they are probably somewhat going to lean towards handling you. That's just a human nature. You like to think that everybody is objective and down the middle and whatever and not swayed, but there is human nature that comes into it. And I don't know Mike Woodson. The people that I know that know Mike Woodson all say he's a super guy. The people I know that have worked with Mike Woodson have a lot of respect for him. And he's a guy's guy. I think he's like a cooler than school, like, you know, kind of cooler than the room guy. Maybe sometimes that's to a fault, maybe. But I just thought I don't know how this turned into like a whole thing about him, but that was a big topic going into the game. And unfortunately for Mike Woodson, what he fails to realize is that what he did with those comments was overshadow the accomplishments of his players for the last 3 games, including a very good performance on the road last night that has Indiana at least going into the Big Ten tournament. I agree with you. Seemingly it's meaningless, but it at least has them going into the Big Ten tournament on a nice note to end the year, and also, you know, against a team like Minnesota that you're vying for seed within the tournament.
The reason it irritates me is that it gives, though, false hope and false evidence for the idea that next year is guaranteed to be more successful. And look, I want to eat a good helping of crow. I want that to be the case. I want...
Has anybody ever eaten crow, do you think?
I don't know. I'm sure there are people out there. But my point with
I
it
watched
is...
Naked and Afraid. They probably have,
you
right?
get hungry out there on the island, for sure. I hope that I'm dead wrong on this. I hope that Indiana next year turns it around, makes a run to the second weekend because they hit it out of the park in the transfer portal and everything's fixed and Renew and Mbako didn't stay and Liam McNeely's one of the best freshmen ever walked through Indiana. I know that one's probably a big ask, but you get what I'm saying. I hope I'm wrong on all counts.
I hope Liam McNeely proves to be as big a recruit with as much promise fulfilled as Hunter Perea and Romeo Langford.
But Mike Woodson needs to understand, regardless of the arrogance in the comments, he needs to understand that if it does go the other way, this is going to get a far lot worse before he's actually shown the door. And if that is the level of thickness of the skin, those press conferences are not going to be a happy affair for anybody involved.
Zach Ostman joining us next. Michael Grady, friend of the program, of course, friend of Indianapolis, the pride of Warren Central, now the voice television-wise of the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are in town to take on the Pacers, is going to join us coming up in about 30 minutes. Tony, East 2 o'clock. Big show lined up on a Thursday. Thanks for joining us. It's Query & Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
$5,000. That's the
playing this song because earlier today he saw me in my white leisure suit just strutting around Monument Circle. Had this bad boy playing in the AirPods. I went full Bee Gees. Hell, let's go. Love it.
Thought it was a Christmas suit for a Capital One ad, starting to throw Christmas ornaments up and asking us what's in your wallet at the end.
Speaking of what's in the wallet, perhaps that had a lot to do with Mike Woodson coming back for year number 4. I say that somewhat flippantly, but guy that had that story yesterday, and we'll get to that, but I do want to focus on what Indiana did on the floor last night in Minnesota. Zach Ostman of the Indianapolis Star joins us now. Zach, first question that I'll ask about Indiana. I personally think that in the last couple of games, a guy that has really started to blossom and show off more of an array of his offensive skill. I've been really impressed with Khalil Ware. I know that he had huge expectation coming in, but it seems as though he's starting to show a little bit more offensive flexibility, as I said it the way I worded it earlier. Has Indiana come up with different ways to get him involved, or has he just figured out different ways to be fluid around the basket, or was I just not paying attention for like 15 games?
I mean, the way these things are, it's probably always a little bit of everything. I do think he's been playing better. I mean, you look at, this 3-game win streak, 63 points. I'm just doing the math while we're talking here, but 24 of 31 from the floor, 3 of 5 from behind the 3-point line. He's only missed one of his last 6 free throws, and then obviously, 37 rebounds in 3 games kind of speaks for itself. Obviously, he's had, if you want to think back through some games, the loss to Northwestern, he had 22 and 16. The first loss to Penn State, he had 25 and 11. Even in some wins, he had 17 and 14 in the win against Minnesota in Bloomington back in January. But I think I do think where it's probably your assessment rings most true is, and this is true of Khalil Ware, I think it's true of Mackenzie Mbako. I think it's true of just kind of the wider picture. Mike Woodson has kind of insisted for these last several weeks that, the injuries and different things that basically there was an Indiana in his mind's eye that never really got a chance to take form because this guy was out injured or that guy was out injured or whatever it was. And, I don't know that that's necessarily like the only thing that's happened with this team, but to be fair to Woodson, I think this is the first time where he's had, to use his words, a full deck to really kind of figure out how to make it look like what he thought it would. And I think suddenly a lot of these guys' performances are a little bit more consistent and also just kind of make sense in the wider context, if that sort of makes any sense. Again, when Khalil Ware is 10 to 14 from the floor and has, 22 points and 16 rebounds, but he also misses 3 free throws, and Indiana loses at home to Northwestern, you say, well, that's a nice individual game, but what does it do for the bigger picture? Suddenly, all these individual performances are fitting into a bigger picture that is obviously succeeding, and I think that that makes a little bit of a difference for each of these individual players.
Zach, did the winning streak, the little 2-game mini winning streak, now up to 3, have anything to do with like a proof of concept for Mike Woodson's argument that, hey, not having Xavier Johnson and the inconsistency at guard play is what's plagued us this year. We need to see what this looks like in year 4. Did the win streak itself have anything to do, or was this always the plan?
I mean, possibly, and it's also worth saying, 2 of the 3 teams Indiana's beaten in this win streak are below Indiana in the Big Ten standings, but then I think Mike Woodson would be justified in saying, well, they were above us until we beat them. So, the more you win, the higher you climb. I mean, I think Indiana with the tiebreakers is technically 8th in the conference right now. The higher you climb up that list, the more teams that you beat are just naturally going to be behind you. I think there probably is, I think that's a good term, there probably is some proof of concept. I think there probably also just is, frankly, Indiana played a Wisconsin team that hasn't been itself since late January. They've only won 2 games since February 1st. They got that team at home. They beat them. They went and beat a Maryland team that I think they just match up really well against, and then a Minnesota team that I thought, frankly, played a little bit scared. And I think Indiana did well to capitalize on that. But Minnesota looked nervous about sort of wasting the opportunity last night, and Indiana just looked like it could play free. And without a lot of pressure, and I think the game played out that way. So it's again, like, I know these are cop-out answers, forgive me, but it feels like it's never any one thing. I don't think there was, just basically one cog in the whole machine that, clearly just needed to be pushed back in to get everything working smoothly again. And it's not like Indiana's a perfect team. I can still run you through each of these three games and, point out, for example, they gave up a big lead at against Wisconsin. They were down pretty big at Maryland. The Minnesota game, I think, was pretty fairly kind of Indiana's all the way through. But it's, again, just a team that maybe is starting to recognize what it was chasing and how it could get there all season. And that's probably happening a little bit late, and it's probably ultimately going to wind up falling short of kind of anything meaningful in the postseason. But, if you're Indiana, it at very least kind of underscores this idea that I think a number of us have been sort of trying to enunciate, kind of as observers or just kind of unbiased, analysis of this season, of saying, listen, anybody who's frustrated with this, you understand where they come from, but there's a difference between disappointment and disaster, and this team this season probably leans more heavily toward that first column than the second.
Zach Ostman of the Indianapolis Star is our guest. Zach, I want to go to Mackenzie Mbako, and a guy that clearly has talent. That talent is now starting to show itself, I think, with a little bit more consistency. And I this is a weird question to ask, I realize, because we should simply be living in the now, but it is what it is. Does an increased play from Mackenzie Mbako or increased consistency also increase the likelihood that he is not here next year?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I haven't checked in on this in a while. I probably should soon. I usually kind of do sort of a check of like individual draft stock and things around the end of the season. And I don't want to sit here and make myself sound like I've got the ear of every single, chief scout and assistant GM in the league. I don't want to misrepresent myself there either. My sense for a while has been that he's still pretty far from the draft conversation. And while he's played a lot better, and actually I think, for all people justifiably want to talk about his scoring load, he's averaging 16.3 points per game across the last 7. He's averaging, I think, 17.7 in the last 3. He's made a lot of threes that have been really – he's made, like, not just, made threes. He's obviously been shooting the ball well lately. But it felt like for a long time Indiana was lacking that player that would just make basically the one extra shot that would either kind of punctuate a run or maybe close a gap, that would – Indiana would get a game from, 10 points to 4 points, and then you just need somebody to make one more shot to really bring it back in the balance. They couldn't find that player, and I think Mbako's been that player. I actually think, though, really where he's probably been most impressive to the naked eye has been on defense. I think he's come a long, long way with his defensive instincts, his effort, just kind of his understanding conceptually of what Indiana's trying to do at that end of the floor. But, in the same breath, he's not scoring 30 points a game. And I do think there was, kind of a lot of distance for him to travel to get back in the conversation around the NBA draft this year. That you never know. He's certainly at least the kind of player who it might make sense to declare, go through the process, get some feedback, see where he stands. And all it takes is one or two teams to put him through a good workout and feel like they can, do something with him and maybe suddenly the path is open for him to go to the draft. But unlike someone like Kel'el Ware, where you kind of look at his profile and you look at where his position is relative to, I think, what is generally perceived to be a weak draft class this year. And you just kind of find it hard to imagine that there's any real, there's any obvious path for him other than entering the draft after this season. I don't know that anybody else on this team, including Mbako, is particularly close to that right now. But again, all it takes is one team, one executive, one person, one decision maker to get bought in, and that can change.
Zach, let's just say for the sake of argument that Mackenzie Mbako does not enter the NBA draft and is playing college basketball next season. I think it's clear to a lot of us, and I think you would agree with this, based on IU's current roster construction, it is guard play that is their biggest weakness. It's not about wings, it's not about size, it is about high-level guard play and them needing to get that in the portal this coming offseason. How much is winning at guard in the portal tied to retaining Malik Renew and Mackenzie Mbako? In other words, their futures of maybe transferring elsewhere, how much is that tied to IU showing we will have stable guard play in the 24-25 season?
It might be a part of it, and I think that, the issue is you can kind of turn it in the opposite direction as well, which is I think that Mackenzie Mbako's gotten a lot better lately, so is Trey Galloway, and I'm guessing that we could, if we sifted through enough film, we could find ways in which those two players' improvements have basically kind of dovetailed with one another, that Mbako has fed off of, Galloway becoming a creative force at frankly, a level of volume, if we're talking about assists or, if you want to do percentages, assist rate, whatever it is, that Indiana's, really struggled to find earlier in this season, certainly when Xavier Johnson was injured. But we also can probably find some evidence that Trey Galloway's been helped by suddenly having a wing player, to use the old Red Auerbach term, a corner man that can knock down some of those threes, and suddenly the driving lanes aren't as pinched, defenses aren't sagging as much because they don't feel like they can let this guy go because he started proving he can hit 3, 4, 5 threes in a game if you leave him open. So those two things will always kind of go hand in hand. And then there is also, the element of, yes, who you're playing with, the system you're in. Do you have the adequate sort of pieces to help showcase each individual's talent will always be part of it. The NIL piece will always be part of it, though, too. I used to be loath, and Jake will remember this, to kind of talk about, who do you think might transfer, or, is there any speculation about who might go? Now it's almost like it's kind of swung all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where you just sort of look at it and you say, literally anybody could transfer, because that's just
no question.
That's just the.
It's like trying to figure out the Falcons quarterback, right?
You know what? We just don't.
It's very similar.
Hey, that franchise will get me back when it earns me back, and I don't think I don't think Kirk Cousins is the path to that. But we're just going to set that to one side. The point is, there's rumors that this person's transferring, that person's transferring. It's like, listen, in this era, you almost have to assume everybody's transferring. Like when coaches tell you, when every coach in high major basketball, football tells you have to re-recruit their roster every year, maybe it's time to listen to them and just understand that that's the nature of all this. But what I would say, when you kind of set this win streak against the context of basically what comes next for Indiana, because we can all kind of recognize that, the shot is still very long for this team getting into the NCAA tournament. And while I don't know if anybody has maybe sort of like said this out loud anywhere, or this is written in stone, I'll be honest, I'm not even totally sure, no matter how the season ends, that there's a huge appetite for the NIT with this program, even if they were invited. I just think that maybe that's again, such a weird sort of conversation to have in the sort of portal early entrant draft era. Like, just, is there value in the NIT anymore? And I think that's a whole separate conversation about basically what do we do with legacy events like that aren't the NCAA tournament. We don't have to go down that road. But as you kind of contextualize this against whatever we need to sort of analyze spinning this season forward, I think you can look at some of these pieces that Indiana's got, like the idea of Trey Galloway is basically an established point guard if he comes back for his COVID year. The idea of Mackenzie Mbako, I would argue, frankly, is a potential all-league caliber wing. I mean, he has looked very different across the last month. I wrote something today that'll be out tomorrow that argues he should maybe be Big Ten Freshman of the Year, and I'm not sure he'll win it because those awards tend to kind of calcify in terms of who's perceived to be the front runner after a while. But the way he's come on the last few weeks here, I'd argue he's got as good of a case as anyone. And so there are some guys here like a Kalel Ware that you just have to look at and say, hey, it may be one of those, shake your hand and wish you luck kind of situations, get you ready for the draft. But there are some other guys in this, whether it's a Galloway and Mbako or Renew, et cetera, that Indiana could, in theory, build meaningfully around. And I think to your point, it's kind of that balancing act of making sure you keep those guys, but then also making sure, by sort of showing them that you're gonna bolster the roster with the right pieces in the portal. But then when you get into the portal, or maybe some high school recruitment that opens up in the spring or whatever, having the established talent already in the locker room that says, if you come here, we're going to be an outfit that's serious about winning.
Zach, what do you think? Zach Ostman is our guest of the Indianapolis Star. You obviously, it's funny, NIL stuff, it's like Bitcoin, like 2 years ago, people are like, yeah, okay, whatever. And now all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Like this thing's all over the place. Having said that, I don't know how much you follow this because it's not Indiana, which is your beat. So I don't want to, feel free to say like, hey, I haven't read into that enough. But what do you make of the Dartmouth basketball team deciding to unionize and what I think is probably going to turn out to be a precedent for other, programs throughout college basketball? Is this thing like a hornet's nest that's going to continue to just spin in a million different directions?
Yes, and forgive me, I just had a coughing fit while we were on the phone. So if I'm catching my breath here, I apologize. The short answer is yes, it is. The long answer is all these kind of issues are being conflated a little bit. And I've talked to classes about this a couple of different times, and it's tricky because all of this stuff has basically kind of one sort of root cause or is all based in one, root discussion, which is essentially, are college athletes employees? Should they be compensated? Should they be paid? But all this is coming from different directions. So, for example, the Supreme Court case that is often cited with Brett Kavanaugh's pretty, frankly, fiery concurring opinion and all this, that actually has nothing to do with NIL. It's a different form it was a challenge over a different form of potential compensation for athletes. And it often gets kind of conflated with or used as sort of in support of NIL when it was not the Supreme Court in any way ruling on anything to do with name, image, and likeness. It just sort of basically is another sort of subhead of the same wider conversation around athlete compensation. Unionization is another one of those things where there's a lot of wires that cross. There's a lot of stuff that ties together that is not necessarily, unionization is not a direct sort of cause effect of NIL or vice versa. It's just different sorts of basically arguments under the same wider umbrella, if that makes sense. This one specifically, and I am obviously, no expert in federal labor law, but it's important to note that this is happening under the National Labor Relations Board, which is a function of the executive branch of the federal government. So whenever you see people going to Congress lobbying for federal NIL reform, that is legislative relief for what is going on here. When you see the Supreme Court ruling on the Alston case, that is the judicial branch of government basically offering sort of its assessment of things. This is the executive branch. That's important for a few reasons. Number one, obviously, there's a lot of bureaucracy. It's frankly taken about 2 years for, about 2.5 years for kind of an initial NLRB memo, basically accepting the argument that some college athletes can be classified as employees, to sort of calcify into this wider, this specific instance of some athletes trying to unionize. Then there's also the element of, it's an election year. The NLRB is, again, it's a function of the federal government or the executive branch of the federal government, which means that if we get a new presidential, if Joe Biden is not reelected for any reason, somebody else occupies the executive branch, suddenly all those sort of, auxiliaries of the executive branch are occupied with other people. Maybe attitudes change. Dartmouth is going to appeal this. That appeal is likely going to take months, if not years. This specifically is not going to be resolved anytime soon, and it is going to be affected by national politics in a different way, but like any of the rest of us would, this is probably more than you were looking for. Forgive me. And I don't know that I got to a satisfactory answer because, again, this is sort of a 2-hour conversation.
I mean, it's a hornet's nest, right? That's the thing. Like, it's just it's going to be a topic of conversation. You know, Mike Woodson's future, we managed to get an answer on. This one, we won't have an answer for probably a couple of years. One-word answer on this last one, Zach. Big Ten champion right now for the regular season is?
For the regular season?
Yes.
But it's already established. Purdue won it, right?
So the answer is the Big Ten regular season champion is?
Purdue.
Okay. I only say that because people said that every time you come on, all we talk about is Indiana. So there you go. Zach Osterman of the Indianapolis Star giving props to Purdue. Zach, appreciate it. Go Falcons, all right?
Whatever. I appreciate y'all having me.
Zach
Good
Osterman.
talking to you as always.
All right. Zach Ostman of the Indianapolis Star. Michael Grady, by the way, going to join us about 8 minutes from now. It is the other side of it, the pro side of Indiana, Minnesota. Pacers-Wolves tonight.
The Indy 1500 Gun and Knife Show is this.
was at Mall of America, and the Mall of America parking garage, all of the different areas are designated by state names so you can remember them. Mall of America's in Minneapolis. I parked in Indiana. I got out of my car. I started welcoming people to Indiana in the parking garage. Security came over, asked me what the hell I was doing. Only point of the story is to say that Minnesota, Indiana is a theme on the show. We just talked about it collegially. We'll do it professionally with Michael Grady next.
This is the day.
reawakening the argument that I will die on, saying that there is no South Detroit? Is that what you're doing? You can't play this song without me bringing up every time Steve Perry and Journey's complete geographical naivety, just so you know. South Detroit's Windsor, Canada, for crying out loud. Joining us now, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so off that intro, of course, he is a familiar voice, not only for this radio station, but throughout Central Indiana, who used to work in this building and now, last night, probably just slept right around the corner from it. Michael Grady joins us on the program, the television voice of the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are at the Fieldhouse tonight taking on the Pacers. Michael, welcome home.
I appreciate that, Jake. Appreciate that. Good to be on with you, my man.
Hey, let's begin, and I'm happy to have you. Let's begin with this. The big story from the Timberwolves side of things is obviously the injury of Karl Anthony Towns, and I was thinking about this on my way in. Look, Minnesota's got not one but two of the best big men in basketball with Rudy Gobert on the other side. Do they change things? You would know, obviously, better than anybody, how many offensive sets they run where Gobert and Towns maybe run similar kind of stuff? Can they slide Gobert over into some of the areas where offensively Towns did things, or do they just kind of go as is without Towns into the equation and Gobert's game doesn't change much?
And they mix things up. They have a lot of different personalities with the lineups that they have. They have Naz Reid, who comes off the bench, and he's a dynamic scorer off the bench and helps the offense flow in ways that we don't necessarily see with Karl Anthony Towns. There are lineups that are unique with Naz Reid out there, where the pace is much quicker. Kyle Anderson, when he comes in there, more of a facilitator, can get his own shot. We call him Slow-Mo. He lives up to that nickname. And so he playing alongside Rudy Gobert, they have a great pick and roll connection. So it's really just a matter of sliding things around. They played 52 games without Karl Anthony Towns last season, where Kyle Anderson was in the lineup. It was Rudy Gobert's first year with the team, and so there were a number of hiccups along the way. This one, while it is a blow, a gut punch to miss Karl Anthony Towns for an extended stretch, that chemistry, that camaraderie, that understanding of how to play without him is much stronger than what we saw a season ago. So there's the upcoming schedule is brutal, but collectively I feel like there's a better chance to absorb that blow this season than what we saw last season.
Indy's own Michael Grady, TV voice for the Minnesota Timberwolves, is our guest. MG, how much, if any, parallels, both within the fan base of the market as well as with the teams themselves, do you see with this Timberwolves teams currently top of the conference in the West, or right there with OKC anyway, and those Pacers teams of 13 and 14 that were leading the charge in the East?
I think that'll reveal itself once we get to playoff time, and I think the reason I say that is I remember during those Pacers runs, Indiana lost to Miami in the conference semifinals. And the next year they met Miami in the Eastern Conference Finals, and Miami won Game 7 in Miami. So that whole offseason into training camp, all you kept hearing out of the Pacers camp was, we have to get home court advantage next season. We have to get home court advantage. We have to crush this regular season, because if we face those dudes again in Game 7 and it's at the Fieldhouse, we feel like we got them. We have to get a home court advantage. And then what happens? They go through the whole season, get home court, lose one of those first two games at home, and they were toast. It is a mental roller coaster, and you have to have a certain level of mental toughness to, one, get through the regular season and then understand that everything goes to an entirely different level. And even if you lose one of those first two games on your home court, the series still doesn't necessarily have to be over. But this is a part of the psychological warfare that the Pacers had to endure during their run to trying to knock off Miami. This Timberwolves squad, they're putting a lot of effort. They've been playing high-level basketball trying to get this, number one seed. And if they get number 1, 2, whatever, without Towns, if they dip a little bit, that's all fine. If mentally you are ready for an entirely different level, entirely different chapter once you get to the postseason. Because as it stands right now, if they're the number 1 seed, they could face LeBron in round 1. They could face Luka Doncic and the Mavericks. They could face Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors. So just because you finish with a high record doesn't mean that you can exhale or take your foot off the gas. And then you are going to an entirely different level when you get to the postseason. So that's what I'm curious about. This is a team that hasn't advanced beyond round one since the 2003-2004 season. And, oh, by the way, that was the only time in the 35-year history of the Timberwolves that they've advanced beyond the first round. So there are a number of psychological hurdles that they are going to have to clear along the way. And I think from a storytelling standpoint, it makes it a lot of fun from my seat.
Michael, every team has obviously a guy that leads them in scoring, right? I mean, that goes without saying. Anthony Edwards is that guy from Minnesota and is an emerging star, if not already a star. But I'm curious of this. There are guys that I look at and I call them get the hell out of the way guys. And by that I mean when the game's on the line, everybody knows where the ball's going, and he literally has a look like just get the hell out of the way and I've got it from here. There's a lot of talent on that roster. Anthony Edwards, has he shown that he has that kind of Jimmy Butler type dog in him?
Yes, and he's only 22, and so the dog in him is just going to grow and grow and grow as long as he puts in the work, as long as he has the people around him to nurture that talent. And I don't think that that's something that you can develop. I think it's either in you or it's not. And Anthony Edwards, from a competitive standpoint, just loves to battle anybody, no matter what it is. And it could be playing cards, it could be playing checkers, it could be on the basketball court doing shooting drills. He wants to annihilate everybody, and he does it with a smile. And so he is one of those old school throwback competitors who wants to take the tough shots, wants to put the team on his back, is fine facilitating and is still learning how to pick and choose when to be in attack mode, looking for his own shot, and when to set up his teammates. That's all a part of the process of being a young player in this league. But if he had it his way, he would take the ball every single time and try to make something happen. So it's a process. It's a development process. He's still extremely young, but he has all these intangibles that make you feel like if he puts it all together, he's going to be one of those guys. He's going to be one of those guys when you talk about faces of the league, and he would be on that Mount Rushmore once your LeBrons of the world, your Steph Currys of the world, and your Kevin Durant's or whatnot begin to go by the wayside. So he has all the tools, Jake, to be extremely special.
Speaking of guys that could go by the wayside, Michael Grady is our guest. That's not what I'm talking about. You're not one of those. You're still young. But to make one feel old, you look at Mike Conley and the fact that he is now an older player. He's an elder statesman, but he's been a solid player, obviously, from Minnesota. How has his game changed from younger Michael Conley, and what does he bring consistently from Minnesota?
I think he's aged gracefully. He's one of those fine wine players in this league who understands his body, understands what he needs to do to be effective, and has figured out how to prolong his career. And there are a lot of guys that we see who don't necessarily age gracefully, who don't put in the work to add little things to their game to prolong their career. And so I've appreciated about Mike that he's the exact opposite. He's the oldest guy, in the locker room, and he has a special relationship with everybody on the roster. And so I kind of call him a teammate whisperer. Last season, the team was really struggling. D'Angelo Russell was at the point guard spot. They made a trade, brought Mike Conley in. Rudy Gobert was among, a number of guys who was really kind of in his head and really couldn't get out of his own way. And to have Mike Conley, a former teammate of his at Utah, come in, settle him down, begin to build a chemistry with everybody on the roster on a human level and on a basketball level. And I think it just made everybody kind of exhale. Okay, we got a grown-up in the room who's going to make everything go. And to have an entire offseason with Mike Conley and to step into this year, and when I talk about expanding your game, he's shooting a career high from three-point range this season. As a 36-year-old, a career high from three-point range. His athleticism is dipped, but he still has this floater that's in his game. He still gets after it defensively. I think outside of Rudy Gobert, he may be second best on the roster at setting screens. He just does all the little things that impact winning. And I think it's no surprise that over the course of Mike Conley's career, he's been the head of the snake of an outstanding Memphis Grizzlies team. He's been the head of the snake on an outstanding Utah team. And now the Timberwolves at this moment being tied for first in the West, he's the head of the snake in terms of the point guard of this squad. So he's just been an unbelievable professional. It's been wild, as you have, as many of us here in Indianapolis, to be able to watch his maturation from his Lawrence North days playing with Jack Kiefer and alongside Greg Oden to Ohio State and then over a long NBA career. It's been special.
TV voice in the Minnesota Timberwolves, Michael Grady, joins us. MG, one of my favorite players, star pop division on the Timberwolves, and I've enjoyed watching him since his high school days, is Naz Reid, the big fella off the bench. For him this season, he has been key for them in a lot of different ways. How does his role change, does the 24-year-old big man, in the absence of Karl Anthony Towns with the injury?
I think the same goes for a lot of teams when you lose a star player. Everybody has to elevate their level of play, and your margin for error becomes that much tighter. And so for Naz Reid, when Towns is in the lineup, if Naz has an off night, it might be okay. You can absorb that because you have Karl Anthony Towns. He's out there getting 20 points per game each and every night. With Towns out of the lineup for an extended period of time, you really can't afford Naz to have too many off nights off the bench. And so that's what's going to be key. And Naz has all the tools, skill level, everything to go out there and produce. He's an excellent three-point shooter. He's great at attacking and finishing at the rim. He's been an improved defensive player this season. He gets into trouble at times with turnovers when he's trying to do fancy dribbling in traffic and getting in foul trouble. And so if Towns is out there, Towns is having an off night, you can bring Naz Reid in there and he can clean things up. Without Towns, if Naz is having an off night, who are you going to? So, again, the margin for error is that much tighter. Kyle Anderson has to elevate his play. Rudy Gobert you don't think of him as a scoring big. He may be around a 12 points per game guy, but if he can up that just a little bit, if they're looking for him in pick and roll and looking at him as a rim runner or whatnot, you need more production from him. Anthony Edwards can't have too many off nights. It's just going to have to be a collective effort until Towns is able to return, which could be in a 4 to 8 week period, depending on the course of action he chooses to take with that meniscus.
Michael, one of the funny things about the NBA, and listen, I don't have to tell you this. I mean, you probably lived this critique on a regular basis when you were in these studios, is, people getting upset with load management. And I get it, right? People pay big money to see stars, and they go, and that guy's taking a night off. And I'm not here to try to carry water for players of the NBA, but I think you can shed light on this. Now that you are traveling, and you have been for a couple of years, I realize, but traveling with an NBA team, and even though you're flying, you're not having to go to Southwest and do the early bird check-in, right? I get that, but just the rigors of it. Like, do you ever just stop and think about what it would be like to have to go out and I know they're making a ton of money. I get all that, but it has to at times, does it not? Aren't there times where you have to think to yourself, I really would like to just go back to the hotel and take a nap because we got in at like 3 o'clock in the morning and shoot around at 10 and then a game at 7. Can you speak to just kind of the overall rigors of a full season of NBA travel?
Yeah, I personally feel like if a player is healthy, then he should play. If he has some sort of an injury that could be aggravated and you have a back-to-back coming up and you choose to err on the side of caution, I don't have as much of an issue with that when you're thinking about long-term health and the eye on the prize at the end of the season and the postseason. We had a game earlier this season against the Miami Heat, and it may have been the second or third game of the year, and Jimmy Butler sat. And that's something that I just can't really make sense of. They had a back-to-back, if I'm not mistaken, coming up, but it's the third or fourth game of the year. And so there's been a trend from time to time where, this guy's old, so we're gonna rest him a game here or there, whatever it may be. There are all kinds of ways to manage minutes and manage fatigue. And so that's one side of it. When I started traveling with NBA teams back in, we're going on 7 years now, my first year with the Brooklyn Nets, I had just finished a long stretch of hosting shows on the Fan where if the Pacers were to lose on a back-to-back to a scrub team, I was liable to go on air and go, I can't believe we lost to this squad. Fans calling in, I can't believe we need to change this, we need to do this. And I would be right along with everybody. It occurred to me very quickly in that first year traveling with the Brooklyn Nets that there is such a thing as schedule losses.
That's what I mean. Like, your sleep pattern's got to be completely thrown out of whack, right?
Yeah, yes, and it's just, you have chartered flights, you have this, that, or the other. No, if we have tomorrow's a little bit easier. For example, we go to Cleveland tomorrow. We'll wrap up our game tonight, get everything packed up, head to the airport, get on a plane, go to Cleveland. That's an easier one, if you will. And even then, we're not getting into bed until 1 o'clock, maybe 2 a.m. in the morning, getting a little bit of rest, waking up, and then doing the whole thing again, playing a really good Cleveland Cavaliers squad. That's a tough back-to-back. We have another one coming up where we have a home game, and then we fly to Denver in altitude and face the Nuggets on a back-to-back. We just wrapped up a stretch where we had 5 games in 7 days. And so I'm not running sprints. I'm not putting shots up. I'm not doing anything. And from a broadcaster standpoint, I'm tired.
Of course, we're also not 22, I guess, right? To be fair, but yes, I mean, you know what I mean.
But
totally get it.
We're not playing. Yeah, we're not playing 40 minutes or whatever it may be. And even if you are, again, tired is tired. You may be able to recover quickly if you're younger or whatnot. But still, the rigors of an NBA season. And I'm not saying this to say that I'm cool with load management, because I'm not. I'm saying that there is room for grace given the rigors of an NBA schedule and what these guys have to go through night in and night out. And if I feel it physically in my body, then I have no choice but to give some grace for guys who are going up and down the court. If you're healthy, you should play. If you're dinged up and you have something that the team wants to be cautious about, then okay, proceed with caution, do what you need to do. But I am not going to act like, because these guys get paid a lot of money, they should not be tired.
Right.
because they're on a chartered flight, that makes this much less rigorous for guys. That's just not the case. And then you have all kind of crazy examples. We got into one game in Orlando because of bad weather. We got there the day of the game. The Pacers had that same predicament against the Timberwolves earlier this season. The Warriors just had a game where they didn't get into their next city until, I want to say, 7 a.m. They actually won the game that night. So it's just a crapshoot. You don't know how these games are going to go, but it's not a complaint or anything like that. It's just a little insight that no, this is a drag. I mean, we're 60 games in. Guys are tired. Everybody's fatigued. And the teams that come out successful in the end are the teams that fight through it, who don't make excuses, who fight through the fatigue, who fight through all these rigors that we're talking about, and don't make excuses and go out there and battle. And so I appreciate it. Rick Carlisle, I mean, the Pacers lost that game to Minnesota in the first meeting, but Rick Carlisle was not making excuses in any way, shape, or form. The fact that the Pacers made it in the day of that game. And they went out there and battled, and, Wolves won that game. Tyrese Halliburton didn't play, but I appreciate not making excuses, but just a little peek behind the curtain. Hell yeah, it's certainly a rigorous routine.
How many times have you been, and for those that don't know, it's the home and studio of Prince. How many times have you been to Paisley Park?
I have not yet. I tried to go one time, and then I realized how in demand the venue
is. And it's probably like I think it's like a multi-hour venture, right? Like, isn't it supposedly super cool?
And it's booked out in advance. So I thought on a random day I could just.
I got the day off. I'll just head over.
And so I looked at the calendar. I'm like, oh, it's booked out for another month or whatever it may be. So no, I haven't gone yet. And I was always it'd kill me for it, but I was always more of a Michael Jackson guy than a Prince. So I do want to see it, and I do want to check it out, but that desire didn't hit me as soon as I got there. But I absolutely am going to go check it out at some point before the summer months, because I hear it's amazing. He would have the Minnesota Lynx, the WNBA team, when they were winning championships. He would have them over at his house, and he would do performances for him there. And to hear the stories from that would give you chills, whether you're a Prince fan or not. But no, I hear it's an amazing place, and it is in high demand.
MG, you a burger guy?
You say burger?
Yeah.
Yes, I've given up. I've given up meat for. I've been pescatarian for like 5 years now. But beyond meat, Impossible Burgers, all those things, I'm still a big time burger guy. Do you have a recommendation?
Well, I mean, I was gonna say if you've indulged in the Juicy Lucy's, but I don't know if they do Impossible Juicy Lucy's at Matt's or the 5-8 Club.
I've heard that. I've heard that, and no, I don't think that they've gone that route. And I think that's part of the charm of Juicy Lucy is that you're supposed to feel like you're gonna die after you.
Is that hold on? Is Juicy Lucy? Is that a strictly Minnesota place?
It was started in Minnesota.
Okay.
Yeah.
They don't have it here, right?
I mean, people have bought into it. It's been featured on diners.
No, I know, but
Dash,
they don't have a franchisee in Indianapolis, correct?
Correct. Okay. No, it's just a Minnesota thing. But MG, maybe that's your in to get the burger named after you. It's the Impossible Grady, and it's an Impossible Burger with some cheese in the middle. Come on now.
I'm gonna bring it up with some folks. Yes, no, I have to. I've been the only Minnesota delicacy is I don't know if I would say delicacy, but no, cheese curds, and maybe some other things. But
they stole that from Wisconsin, Michael.
Yeah, they battle. They go neck and neck. But no, those have been the food scene in Minnesota. Everybody asks me about what I think about Minnesota and things like that. The number one thing that surprised me is the food scene is really, really good, especially in the downtown area. So that's been one of the big surprises because I didn't know anything about Minnesota before I got there, except it's cold, Prince is from there, and Mall of America.
They used to have a great place called Joe's Garage in downtown Minneapolis that I think is gone. And the other thing I know about the Twin Cities is that St. Paul is actually super cool, I think. Like St. Paul is like the Meridian Kessler side, at least the areas I've been in. I thought it was super cool.
And some good food spots over there too. So yeah, it's been a good little journey for me in Minnesota this past year and a half, and the team actually playing at a high level is just kind of the icing on the cake.
MG, I'm getting a bunch of requests, including from our producer Eddie Garrison. How's Iowa Wolves life for one Lance Stevenson, and is he getting the call up anytime soon?
I don't think he's going to get a call up anytime soon, but it was a hell of a coincidence to notice that Lance had been picked up by Iowa. Our depth at the guard position is pretty solid, but I mean it's just amazing to think that how many years have passed since the blow in LeBron's years, and just that wild time with the Pacers, and here Lance still is going out there pursuing his dream, and I hear he's putting up good numbers for the Iowa Wolves. I haven't been able to keep close to it, but I see things on social media, and he's out there getting buckets, getting assists, and being his normal flashy self. And so I'll always cheer for Stevenson.
How many Minnesota guards are born ready, though? That's the real question, right? Because only Lance holds that title. Maybe that's the missing ingredient. I don't know. I'm just saying.
The challenge with the Lance Stevenson experience was born ready for what? There were certain nights he was born ready to be a bulldog and get buckets, and there were other nights where he was born ready to get turnovers, and there were other nights where he was born ready to be a pest on the opposition and help the Pacers in that regard. There were other nights it was just the experience. You just didn't know what you were going to get from one night to the next. But
do you remember though, Michael? Like it's fascinating in hindsight because do you remember? There was literally a 3/4 of a season talking narrative amongst us in the media here in Indianapolis of whether or not he was playing himself above the amount of money that Indiana was going to be able to offer. You know what I mean? I mean, it was like there was a brief period there where it was like, man, is he going to get like close to a max deal out of somebody? And then obviously he took the years where free agency would open up for him, and Charlotte kind of gambled on himself, and it didn't work out for him. But I think people forget that there was that period of time here where he was playing at a very high level. And to your point, you kind of never knew when it was going to go south.
You just didn't know. You didn't know if he was going to be the best player on our team or the best player on the other team. And that said, though, I've always said, and he'll always be one of my favorite Pacers, even with the roller coaster experience that we talked about. But I always felt like if Paul George, at the time where they playing together, if he had the same I don't give a bleep dog mentality that Lance Stevenson had, mixed with his own skills, speaking of Paul George, the Pacers absolutely would have been able to get past the Miami Heat in one of those years in the mid-2010s. So he helped the Pacers in so many different ways. And even though he may have poked the bear a little bit too much, I still appreciate everything that he brought that he brought to the table. He was a special talent, super physical, couldn't shoot, but could create, do so many things to dazzle the crowd, to bring the energy up in the building. Pat Bev doesn't do a lot of scoring, but he electrifies the crowd. He's been bringing juice and energy to Milwaukee since his arrival there, and he's done so for other teams. And so Lance was more talented in that regard and brought all the juice and brings back a lot of memories.
He is Michael Grady, Indy's own TV voice of the Minnesota Timberwolves. MG, glad to have you back in town, as Jake said. Welcome back home, and hopefully we get a chance to see you tonight. Enjoy the rest of the ride with the Timberwolves this year.
You got it. Appreciate you guys.
Michael Grady, the voice of the Minnesota Timberwolves, television voice of the Minnesota Timberwolves. What in regard to Lance Stevenson, what did Reggie Miller say? Every team's got to have a little bit of crazy.
Yes. That's factual.
Lance had it for 5 different franchises, enough at once
for 6 different players. He was
exactly to share with 6 different players. Pacers Wolves tonight. From the Pacers standpoint, we mentioned earlier there's one big name that's not going to be on the floor. We'll tell you who it is next.
I'm John Morgan of Morgan & Morgan.
Debates that I've seen on social media. Every so often I put out like surveys of what is the signature song of an artist. Prince has one of the Prince, Michael Jackson, and the Beatles are three that are virtually impossible to come up with. Eddie, what would you say is the signature song of Prince?
Purple Rain.
It's a very, very, very common answer. Jimmy, your thoughts?
I mean, it's hard to argue that. Like, I feel like especially localized within this market, the fact that Super Bowl halftime show, the one the Colts won, and it's Purple Rain, like, I feel like that'll always be in there. What about you?
See, Purple Rain, because of the fact that it was the title of the album and the movie, but it's a lot like Michael Jackson Thriller in the fact that the song is eponymous to the album, and so therefore it kind of gets it like the Thriller video for Michael Jackson is his signature moment, although the moonwalk is pretty big during Billie Jean. But the song, like, you don't hear people necessarily that are like, oh, man, Thriller, the song is on, let me turn it up. And, like, the song Purple Rain, I think, carries more cachet than does Thriller for Michael Jackson.
I think
When Doves Cry is way up there.
I think Raspberry Beret gets the most play in terms of, like, still circulated on, like, a radio. Like, I hear it all the time on B. Like, I think that...
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. When Doves Cry has got to be high on the list.
Yes, I would agree.
1999, going into the new year would have been a massive one.
Yep.
At the time, the funny thing is, two of them that I think were really big when they came out that have not had the staying power. Little Red Corvette was massive when it came out. And I always like Delirious, but that's not in the mix. But I always thought that was a cool song. But in terms of signature players for the Pacers, obviously Tyrese Halliburton is their Purple Rain. Pascal Siakam would be their When Doves Cry. You can go back and forth on both. But their Raspberry Beret, a guy that gets a lot of run, a lot of minutes, not going to be out there tonight. Benedict Mathurin, not going to play tonight. Eddie, what is the injury and or status with Benedict Mathurin that has him out tonight?
A right shoulder sprain.
Have they said how long the expectation is that Benedict Mathurin will be resting said shoulder?
That is not revealed. Rick Carlisle did not speak yesterday. That's because there was no practice from the Pacers yesterday. So my guess in his pregame and media availability later today around 5:30, I would have to assume he will be asked about the status of Mathurin, and we'll get some more clarity on that. So JMV will have you covered in that regard about 3.5 hours away or so.
So Mathurin not being out there, especially in a game like this, though, Jimmy, it's a factor, right? I mean, obviously he is a guy that once, Neesmith came back, he goes back into the second rotation, but still one of the main integral parts of Indiana, both offensive and probably defensively as well when you have a guy like Anthony Edwards out there.
Well, he is, at minimum, your T.J. McConnell aside, because you know that T.J. McConnell is going to go get you anywhere from 15 to 24 on any given night off the bench, but he is your main weapon representing the second unit, as you outlined there. And with the Buddy Hield trade, it was clear that they also want him to continue to grow and to evolve, so that for a point, Benedict Mathurin year 3 next season, you want him to be a high-level starter. But the bigger thing in the now with him being out, Jake, is how frustrating it has to be for Rick Carlisle, for Kevin Pritchard, for Chad Buchanan. We still have yet to see a consistent, I'm talking multiple game, 5, 6, 7 game run of this team fully healthy since they acquired Pascal Siakam. You've had Tyrese go down. You've had Neesmith go down. You've had Mathurin go down. You've had little nicks and cuts and bruises here and there sandwiched in between. You have yet to see this team consistently over even a week stretch be at full strength with every weapon available for Rick Carlisle, every button for him to press since they got Pascal Siakam. And so, yes, in the short term, it stinks for tonight because you look at it, and with Karl Anthony Towns down, even though Benedict Mathurin might have not been the one to exploit that directly, but you think, okay, we're going to be at full strength and take down a wounded Timberwolves team, which, by the way, I thought about this today, Jake, on the way in. Of all the NBA mascots, is there one that you would least like to face wounded than a Timberwolf?
That's an excellent question.
Like a
And
Timberwolf backed in a corner is not something I want to face.
You're right in my wheelhouse on this, so
I
let's
know.
examine
Yeah,
this
I know.
for a second.
That's why I brought it up.
If you were to have all the NBA mascots locked in a room, right?
Yep.
So you got to now. Let me ask you this first, because there are important disclaimers that you have to go over here. Are we talking about the fictional also being in the mix, like they are all brought to life?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
But I'm talking about not like Boomer and Benny the Bull. I mean like the actual, just the mascot, like not the mascot, but the namesake.
So
of the
we're talking an angry, PO'd, and hungry version, right?
Correct.
Oh, definitely Thunder.
Thunder you can avoid. Here's the thing: Thunder doesn't do anything to you, right?
That's right.
It's the lightning
Exactly.
afterwards, Eddie. Now, I would think Grizzlies would be a bit of a handful.
It's up there for sure.
Depending on, I personally think myself of Wizards of being fairly kind.
Sure.
A raptor.
But think of
Raptors
a wizard.
are extinct, are they not?
Well, but we're bringing them alive.
That's a good point. Okay, but here's the thing: I believe raptors. Can you look this up for me, Eddie? I believe raptors might be herbivores.
Depends what type of raptor we're talking about.
I'm not kidding. I think they might be herbivores.
And if we're opening up the Jurassic Park dangerousness, messing with DNA,
you're not asking them to bring friends.
Carnivores.
They are carnivores. Okay, that could be a problem.
Yeah,
that could be a problem.
We'll
okay.
mess around with raptors.
Now, hang on here. Obviously, to be honest with you, depending on how close you get to it, a sun might present a little bit of a challenge. Yep. You're going to have some serious issues there. If you're in the same room with a sun, forget about it, right?
Or a rocket.
Oh, man.
A rocket also could be a problem, but if you stand to the side of it, no issue. It has very poor lateral movement, right?
Now, what about the heat? Is that the same category as the sun?
Same category as the sun, right? I mean, that could be a real problem. The Hornets, depending on how many there are and how close an area you're confined.
Wounded, angry hornets, that's not something you want to face.
A hawk? What are you allowed? What sort of weapon are you allowed? Let's face
magic. You could use any other weapon. You can't, use
okay.
fictitious powers. You don't have it.
Well, now, here's the thing. You know why? Because the magic have all of it, right? I mean, what do you do against that?
Just you call up the Wizards, and then maybe you have a standoff.
Now, you know what's an underrated one that could be a real problem if you're locked in a room and it's angry and PO'd and hungry?
A buck.
A buck, correct. I mean, listen. You think they're cute and everything else? Those things will destroy an F-150. You know how many people? Half the state of Wisconsin. I don't know if you know this or not, but a large percentage of like the economy in Wisconsin is spent on people. Oh yeah, the F-150 there had a buck yesterday out there on the way, just going out to get some Rhinelander, and I mean a buck will destroy your car. Dangerous. You don't want to be in the same room as a Knick. Not intimidating. A Celtic. Not intimidating.
You could be at like almost medieval times if you had the Sacramento Kings and the Cleveland Cavaliers. A lot of swords.
True. That is true.
A lot of sword fights going on there.
What about now? Here's the thing. Just a net. Not imposing.
No.
But you give like a warrior a net, and now you got some problems.
Or like a deadliest catch type of just massive net being thrown at you. Yeah,
you could have
trouble.
some serious problems there, right? I don't think a Maverick is too bad unless he's got his gun, right?
Yes. Then you call the Spurs, and then you're hopefully okay.
Well,
unless it's just the Spur, then.
Here's the thing: does the Maverick have his Spurs?
That's a good question.
Now we're getting into some weird territory here, right? I think overall, to be honest with you. Now, again, the weapons factor is a big one because if you got any of these with a gun, right? But just if you're just going bare knuckle fighting here, I mean, we're going cage match UFC level. I think, to be honest with you, aside from the Sun, I think Grizzlies might be the winner. Although there's one bear that's pretty nice. Brown bears are nice, right? Like Bruin bears. There's one bear that all they eat, they just eat like berries and leaves, and you know what I mean?
I feel like, though, not to discredit the Grizzly, and maybe I'm reevaluating my Timberwolves answer now. If it's a room full of Hornets, man, you're in trouble. Like,
no question.
You're not taking them out with a sword.
It's hard to argue that.
There's no way you're taking out a raptor. I can tell you that.
Well,
how big is a raptor? Are they just like hawks? Or are they like big, huge things?
Big,
the
huge
raptors
things.
walk around, or they just fly?
They walk.
They walk and fly?
I don't think raptors fly.
Are raptors fictional, or did they really exist?
You're putting us all set up for failure here.
Because like there's like pterodactyls, but then I thought raptor was like the Hollywood version of it, because didn't the raptors get named right when Jurassic Park came out, and so they were like going for like the
velociraptors were what the
there you go.
Those are about 6.6 feet tall in approximation.
6.6 feet tall?
Correct.
They are real.
Now, by 0.6.
They're between
0.6 of what?
1,000
A
and
foot?
2,000 pounds.
6.6 feet tall is basically 6'7", right? They're how much again?
1,000 to 2,000 pounds.
They need to get those guys on some semaglutide, I guess, right?
The speed on these guys is what's going to get you. Like, they're insanely quick.
The Raptors are?
The Velociraptors, which is where the namesake comes from, or yes, absolutely.
Then how'd they become extinct?
I mean, I feel like the meteor kind of was went through everybody.
Just one
like
sonic
a broadsword.
boom and they were gone,
Yeah.
right?
The Heat got him.
Here's the thing. So basically what we're getting at is this. It's too bad. What you need, if you're going against the Raptors, what you need is the Thunder, because the Thunder actually are the Sonics. And if there's one thing Raptors are afraid of, it's anything Sonic, correct?
Correct.
They're getting the hell out of there.
Especially supersonic. Yeah, that in there. You're in trouble.
One loud boom, and I got to tell you something. Those Raptors get some PTSD, boys. They are nowhere to be found. Now, the other thing I have, and this is a serious question, back to the game tonight between the Pacers and the Timberwolves. And I think I've asked this before. Is a Timberwolf a breed or a kind of wolf, or is it simply a wolf that lives in the woods? Like, is there a particular kind of wolf that, genetically speaking, is in fact a Timberwolf?
Yes.
There is?
Yes.
And like, as opposed to like a prairie wolf?
An eastern wolf known as the eastern timber wolf. So that's just one sub-sentence. The northern Rocky Mountain wolf.
Well, they're the best team in the West. They can't be the eastern Timberwolves.
The northern Rocky Mountain wolf, a timber wolf that inhabits the northern Rocky Mountains.
Well, that's the Colorado Rockies. These guys have to be confused.
The northwestern wolf, also known as the Mackenzie Valley wolf or the Alaskan timber wolf. There you go. We got all kinds of different timber wolves.
So there's all kinds of like different subbreeds?
Correct.
Okay. Fair enough. But the Timberwolves as a team, I mean, they're really good, and you don't really hear much about them at all. It makes me think about like those Pacer teams when they had.
That's what I was asking him. Go on, sorry.
Like Paul George,
Yes.
David West, George Hill, that team that was, among the best in the East and started out at one point like 22-2. Now you have an idea of how much national chatter there was about Indiana, because it would be the equivalent right now with Minnesota,
Yes.
right? A young budding superstar, a couple of veterans mixed in that have a little bit of nastiness to them.
That's what I was going at with MG last segment, right?
But
I mean,
outside of Minnesota, how many people talk about them? And the West is fascinating because Minnesota, Oklahoma City, Denver, even with Denver having won it last year, if you go, I guarantee you right now, if we patched in a Denver sports talk radio station right now, I guarantee you they're talking about Russell Wilson and the Broncos.
Sure.
Guarantee
What if it was
it.
King? Yeah, I'm not going to fight you on that. We've learned that.
They had Denver. This blows me away. Denver had a sports radio station that was nothing but Broncos. Literally, they talked nothing but Broncos. Now, it didn't last because even the most diehard in the most diehard of markets, and the Denver might be that about the Broncos to any market, to their NFL team in the country. But even that, people were like, okay, enough. Can we mix in some Avalanche, please? But still, I guarantee you, and we haven't even gotten into that yet, the fact that did the Colts
Yes.
actually sit back, prop their feet up, and have a sly, shy grin in the last couple of days? If they did, we'll tell you on the other side exactly why they'd have been justified.
B&W Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Drains.
Somebody else pointed this out. Derek pointed this out. A bull's. You don't. Have you seen the video of the angry bull, Eddie?
Yeah.
YouTube for me, angry bull. There's a video of a bull. He's just standing in a field. Looks like a nice fella. And then a guy comes up with a phone, and you got to hear the bull. The bull is having none of it.
I always wonder what's wrong with people when they participate in the running of the bulls. That always sounds dangerous.
You know what? Forever.
Is that a Jake Corey bucket list item?
100%.
Yeah.
Ever since I read Hemingway, the running of the bulls was a huge thing for me. And then,
have you seen his house in the Keys?
I've never been to the Keys. Can you believe that?
It's a cool spot. The whole setup, like from when it was built, there's like a pool and everything. Bunch of cat. Well, you like that? Bunch of cats.
Yeah,
he has all kinds of cats.
He liked
the
the
property.
cats with the like 6 toes.
Correct.
Or whatever,
Yeah, there's
right?
like 15 of them on the property.
So the running of the bulls in Pamplona, in Spain, bullfighting has been outlawed in the vast majority of Spain. And listen, I'm all for that because I am an animal lover for sure. I get it. I mean, all, especially cows. One of my questions about cows, by the way. Well, I'll get to that. I'll table that. But anyway, the bullfighting thing, like in Barcelona, the old bullfighting rings are now like malls and stuff. They've done away with all that. I always thought the running of the bulls would be an exhilarating and fascinating thing to do. And then it kind of dawned on me the epiphany of what happens to the bulls, and then I really kind of felt bad about it. But I know somebody who's done it, and
it's not the same bulls every year.
It is not the same bulls. They do it one. It is one and done. Believe you me. But here's my question about cows, though. I've always wondered this about cattle. Okay, give me an animal like a farm animal off the top here. Just any animal off the top here. Okay, pig. There are wild boars. Like you go through like Arkansas, there are wild boars everywhere. It's actually a problem in some parts. There's mass aerial hunting because they're massive. Give me another one.
You already said donkey.
Okay, a donkey. So like obviously, and donkeys I always forget. Now you brought this up. A donkey is a combination of like a mule and a horse.
I believe so.
And that makes the donkey, or is it the donkey and the horse make a mule? Something like that. But they are of the equine family, and they're wild horses. I mean, U2 sings about it, right? Who's going to ride your wild horses?
Sure.
They're wild. Where in the world? What is the origin of wild cattle? Is there anywhere ever in anywhere in the world where you're driving along and you're like, whoa, I just came across a stray cow?
I feel like
there's no wild cattle anywhere, right?
I feel like I've seen it in the movies before.
I'm sure
like
in Wyoming.
It stops an intersection. You've like in the movies, you'll be like on a road trip, and
in India they're sacred, and so therefore like they're not but they're not wild though.
You mean wild like crazy, or wild like
no,
oh look a cow, like a deer crossing,
like a wild like not living, not being raised, but for human purposes by a human. Every other animal on the planet, there are like literally as I'm saying this right now, there are people sitting in their car, I guarantee it, or sitting at home or sitting at their office that are like, you know what? I've never thought of that, but this guy's right.
You know who you could ask?
Who's that?
George Hill.
You're right. He would know, right?
Probably. He's got all those
bunch
animals.
of them on the farm, right? Did you find the angry bull by chance?
Jake Query on Twitter with all your random cow pictures. If you find one in the wilds, tag him.
I'm telling you, nobody has ever been driving, and they're like, yeah, we came across this pasture of wild cattle.
Is that why there aren't cow crossing signs?
Correct.
Is that why?
Because cows are very mannerly.
That would wreck a car. Like you talk about worry about a deer, but cow crossings? My goodness.
You kidding me?
Totaled instantly.
Yeah, that would not be good, right? I mean, listen, if you were, when it comes to the price of your car and what the damage that would be done if you hit a cattle, like
insurance companies,
the stakes are high, right?
The roof. Nice. Well done.
Eddie is so impressed. Tony East is next.
Hey guys, looking for a reason to spend
kinds of conflicting reports on the internet, which is all-knowing, about the availability of wild cattle. Now, the Hawaiian wild cattle is a feral breed of domesticated cattle that was introduced in Hawaii in the 18th century and listed as extinct shortly thereafter.
You look like you're at a museum exhibit. The way your monitor is just tilted upward, it looks like you're reading from
year and a half
the
now.
Smithsonian.
I just now learned that the monitor tilts this way, which is wonderful. This is the greatest thing ever now that I can stand up. But I'm telling you, like several other people, somebody sent me this. Where is it? Okay. Let me just read this directly off the internet before we bring in Tony East, who I'm sure is thrilled that we're milking this conversation.
Tony East Thursday. He's ready to go.
Cows are of the bovine species, somebody said. There are a lot of wild ones. Somebody else sent to me from the internet, Jake. Cattle were first domesticated 10,500 years ago from their wild ancestors, but today there are no actual wild cows. I'm just telling you. Bos Primogenius apparently is the breed that we know, like in the, moo moo. Right?
I think they're telling us to move on and get to Tony. That's what I heard. I think that's what's happening. Well, that's not. Are we flying now?
What was that sound effect?
I moved the mouse when I clicked it. Sorry. Supposed to be this.
There it is.
Do we not have a moo? Can we get a moo? Tony East joins us now. Since we're doing animal chat, we might as well begin with this. Tony, how's Pepper?
She's good. She's not eating enough right now, Jake. So if you have any suggestions to get her appetite going, let me know. Also, Cape Buffalo apparently does have wild cattle, per my internet searching just now.
Now wait a minute. Here's the thing. Buffalo they're like cows, right? They're cousins, but they're not the actual thing, right?
Oh. I was just in the bovine family. I didn't realize there was a specific type of wild cattle.
like a spotted cow, other than at a liquor store in Wisconsin. You don't just see spotted cow out in the wild.
Solid brew.
You know what I mean?
Yes, that is true.
That's my whole point. Like you're never driving and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, some cow just ran right across the street. I almost hit it. That never happens, right?
Well, they're 40 times off
That's true.
My one friend chimes in and says, happens all the time down in southern Indiana when a gate is left open.
Yeah, again.
But that's not a wild cow.
Yeah,
that's an escaped cow.
Right. I mean, that's we love Larry. He's a great cow, but he went out and he got a little confused, and so we have an amber. That happens, right? Silver alerts for cows. Tony, no Benedict Mathurin tonight. That affects Indiana or their rotations in what way?
Yeah, you saw in Dallas that he was huge in the first half that night, right? 19 points in that game. I think most of them, at least, were in the first half, and that was the night they needed him to be a scorer, right? Him and Miles Turner setting the tone early in that game instead of being, the Ben Mathurin that he's kind of growing into be. But in terms of what it means for their rotation with McDermott still out, they're going to have to figure out a way to get enough wing minutes, right? Ben Shepherd being back certainly helps, but I think they'll need to rely on Andrew Nemhart a little bit more. And, this Timberwolves team defends like crazy, but they're not the best offensive team. But they're going to need somebody out there on Anthony Edwards like the whole game, right? So Neesmith's going to have to play a ton. I think he'll play more, and they'll just play 9 guys. I think Nemhart's going to have to play more because behind Mathurin, they don't really have like the perfect guy since Shepard's already playing a lot. He's playing very well recently.
Karl Anthony Towns on the other side out indefinitely with that meniscus tear. Is that absence of Karl Anthony Towns, is that something that for the Pacers, their eyes should get wide with excitement of, hey, this is something we can take advantage of? Or is it still enough matchup problems with the depth of this Timberwolves team that it might not be as easy of something to take advantage of as we might think?
Here's the thing, Jody. The answer should be yes. You can take advantage of the Wolves without Karl Anthony Towns, right? Their offense is almost 9 points better per 100 possessions when Cat's on the floor. They dropped to like the league's worst offense almost without him available, right? That's obviously huge. That should be huge for the Pacers against one of the league's best defenses. But I don't think the opponent quality has been something the Pacers can take for granted anymore, who is available and who's not, who they're playing, right? They keep losing to teams they shouldn't lose to. And at this point in the season, even when they're playing a team down, a core key all-star player, it's hard to give them the benefit of the doubt of, well, that's huge for them because they haven't been able to hardly take advantage of any of those opportunities this season. So on paper, yes, the Timberwolves are much worse without, perhaps their best offensive player, but the Pacers haven't given themselves the benefit of being able to take advantage of those opportunities.
Tony East is our guest. Pacers in action tonight taking on the Minnesota Timberwolves. Tony, the obvious question here is simple, and that is, and I don't know, maybe it's not an obvious answer. We saw in Dallas what Indiana's able to do they get out to like a double-digit lead, and they just kind of were able to hold on to that, right? I thought it was a really good performance, but it was coming off of two rather abysmal ones. What is it that eludes for this team the ability to be consistent from one game to the next?
It's kind of tough for me to say. I've wondered that myself. Some of it to me is that their style and identity is so predicated around Tyrese Halliburton and playing with pace that not every team, but some teams that are able to make them look so wobbly have something about what they do defensively that gives the Pacers fits, right? Toronto, who's beaten the Pacers twice this season, have length, and they're really disruptive, and they force turnovers. And the Pelicans are really good at getting back in a zone after makes, and the Magic have a ton of length, for example, right? Those kind of teams, it makes sense to me why the Pacers, who at their best look unbeatable, right? They just handled the Mavs with ease, right? They beat the Pelicans last week at home. They're the only team entering today, I have to say that because the Nuggets play the Celtics tonight. They're the only team that's beaten Boston twice, right? Like, clearly there's something about what they do that at their best is, one of the hardest teams to contain in the league. But there are certain things and schemes and styles that when you slow down Tyrese Halliburton, or at least make his life a little more difficult, that requires them to either change their style, have somebody else step up, have a different system offensively lead them, and they haven't been able to consistently have that be a way that they win, right? They have had games like right after he got hurt where they found some small successes with balance, right? In Atlanta, they beat the Wizards, they beat the Kings on that road trip when their bench was really good, but that's really hard to do on a night-in, night-out basis. There's a reason that that doesn't happen every game. Those guys are younger or inconsistent or aren't starters for a reason. So to me, that's what it is that their style is strong and singular in that way, and Tyrese Halliburton's really good. But when teams can disrupt him, and that has been happening a little bit more recently, although I think some of Halliburton's struggles are on him and just missing shots, they can't play as well. You saw that against the Spurs with Wembanyama really deterring their style around the rim, and they gave Tyrese Halliburton trouble, and they lost again. And that, I think, is the biggest cause of their inconsistencies, is that they haven't quite found a way to have a consistent style when he isn't rolling every game.
Tony East is our guest, covers the Pacers for Sports Illustrated. You can, of course, hear him as well on the Locked On Pacers podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Tony, Obi Toppin over the last couple of games has been exactly what I think fans and Pacers brass, hoped he would be in terms of spacing the floor, in terms of being a timely rebounder, in terms of being a threat from beyond the arc, focusing solely on the three-point shooting. And with the absence of Buddy Hield, we know that nobody's going to be able to completely replicate that because Buddy is one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA, both in volume and in terms of his accuracy, which is why it was such a tough move for them to make. But with Obi Toppin and players like him that have been able to fill that three-point void, how critical is a player like Toppin to where the Pacers want to adapt and grow offensively this season when you have somebody that can consistently stretch the floor the way he can?
Yeah, he's a fascinating kind of test case this season for how important the three is, right? He's up to 40% this season in recent games. Like, he's at 43% since the trade deadline, which is extremely valuable for the Pacers and their bench. And why I think it's been so critical for them of late, and then really all season, but mostly recently after, the Buddy Hield trade, is that second unit, McConnell, Mathurin, Toppin, Shepherd, and Jalen Smith has some good shooters, but like kind of guys who've been up and down. Smith's been down since returning from injury. McConnell's only made like 8 threes all season. Mathurin's had it at times, but not always. Like, that group really needed shooting, and that's why Buddy Hield made so much sense with them sometimes. And without Hield on the team, to have spacing with that unit, they need someone to step up from deep, and Shepherd has recently, and that's been really important. And Jalen Smith made some threes in the last game, but Toppin's been the rock-solid outside guy all season. And I think that's why it's been so important for the Pacers is they need spacing with that group. T.J. McConnell needs a way to be able to get in the lane. And now teams have to decide, okay, do we want to get out on Obi Toppin, not let him square up and drill these threes, or do we want to prevent him from getting inside the arc? Because guess what? He still leads the league in two-point percentage right now at 68.9. So he's just got this inside-out game that's really tough to contain. He's really good at the Pacers style. And I think with the bench group that really needs some perimeter shooting, the fact that he's been maybe the most consistent guy of that group is important for them.
Tony East is our guest talking about the Pacers, who, of course, are taking on the Timberwolves tonight at the Fieldhouse. Tony, one of the questions that I've been thinking about lately is this. Well, let me begin by saying this. Jalen Smith contractually is where? I always forget. Is he end of this year free agent, or does he have 1 year after that?
he has a player option at the end of the season worth about $5.4 million. So he could be a free agent after this year. It's up to him.
I would assume that he has probably played his way into picking up that option on his behalf and seeing what's out there. Would you agree?
Yeah, declining the option and exploring his options, because I think for him, he's still so young that money doesn't have to be his driver. He could look for minutes, right, a starting job, something like that, and then get paid as a result of how he plays in that situation. So not only is it about money for him, it's that he's going to be behind Miles Turner again next year. He's got a lot to consider, I think, at free agency this summer.
Okay, so having said that, has Jalen Smith played his way, if he were to become a free agent, into getting money that would continue to relegate Isaiah Jackson into kind of that backup role? Or has Isaiah Jackson played his way into not necessitating having to spend big money for Jalen Smith?
Man, I think it kind of depends on the rest of their summer and what they're able to do financially, because without Hield in the fold anymore, they're probably clear of the luxury tax worries they could have had next summer. So their team building is somewhat straightforward in terms of what they need to do. But in terms of what they do with their room under the tax, it might depend on what's available to them. Like, let's pretend someone they really like is available for the mid-level exception, and they know they can agree to a deal. Well, they could be confident in saying, all right, we can go get that guy. We've got Isaiah Jackson to be our backup 5, and if we lose Jalen Smith, we'll just have changes at the backup 5. It's not necessarily a huge upgrade or downgrade at that spot. Or, we couldn't get anybody we liked with our resources. Well, we know we can have one of the best backup 5s at age 24 in the league on our team. Let's keep him. I think it can be flexible given how their summer goes, and I think that's important to the Pacers, that they're going to have the chance to say, you know what, we don't need to prioritize our own guys. We can go out and see what's out there. And given kind of how the new CBA has made these mid-level exceptions more valuable, because now you can trade it for a player. It doesn't have to just be used to sign a free agent. That's going to be important to them, I think, to have those options, to see what's out there. And I don't think they'll string Jalen Smith along necessarily and say, hey, wait, let us see what we have option-wise, and we'll get back to you. He's got to figure out his stuff too. But just being able to be flexible in that way, because they have a rock-solid third big who can be a backup on their team already, I think makes it a lot easier for them to make those decisions. And not easier to let Jalen Smith go per se, but just easier to kind of navigate the summer that could be and make it not as complex for them, and they're not bent over a barrel to keep them like they will be with Pascal Siakam, for example.
Tony East is our guest, covers the Pacers for SI.com, and you can hear him as well on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Tony, with Tyrese Halliburton, have we learned enough about him during his tenure with the Pacers to be able to say, after his most recent performance against Dallas, when he says he put in the work and he went in the lab to kind of figure out what was wrong with his game, and then he has a really solid performance against Dallas, is one game enough to say, hey, the slump's now over with him? Or do you still need to see it now consecutively over the next couple of, okay, he's bounced back after what has been, whether it's an injury ailing him still, whether it is just all-star fatigue, either way, he's now out of that rut?
Yeah, I never really think he's as down as everybody else does. Like, he obviously played very poorly over the weekend, including possibly his worst game as a Pacer. In the first 3 out of 4 coming out of the All-Star break, he averaged 17 and 11 and shot it pretty well, and they went 3-1 in that stretch, and they almost won the game they lost. Like, he played good coming out of the break and looked more like himself in those stretches, and that's not to belittle what happened. Like, going scoreless is, from an All-Star, is like borderline unacceptable, and the Spurs game, he played very poorly and missed all his threes in a game they needed to win. But I always just think the way he plays, the gravity he has, even when he's not necessarily making his shots, is still so important for this team that, I think the Pacers and Tyrese Halliburton have confidence that he could bounce back at like literally any moment, because, his stat line looked good and he was important, plus 18 in that Mavs game, but it didn't really come alive until the second half, right? They were up 4 at halftime and Miles Turner was kind of leading the way, but in the second half, he was plus 12 of his significant margin. He had 15 points and 3 assists in the second half, right? It mostly just exploded on in the third quarter. So that's kind of what it is, and what it has been to me with him all season is he's so good at figuring out what a defense is throwing at him and kind of reacting to it, adjusting to it, and that's what I think his stats kind of pick up as the game goes along. And I think a similar case can be made about his play. When he's going through slumps, he kind of figures out why. He identifies what defenses are doing that's making it hard for him, and he figures it out. He explodes out of it. That happened in late December of this season. So I think that, yes, that third quarter was significant, and I think he will be better tonight than he has been recently. But I also think this is just kind of part of what Tyrese Halliburton is he goes through the evolution of being a lead guard, taking his lumps as he evolves into a new player every so often, and he explodes out of him and looks great again. I think he will again pretty soon.
Tony, in your opinion, give me the number of teams in the East that are definitively, even if things went their way, the Pacers don't beat them in a 7-game series, better than Indiana.
If everything went their way, would beat the Pacers in a series?
No. I'm saying, so there are some teams that I think you could look at and say, for example, Cleveland. Cleveland might statistically be better than Indiana, but you're like, yeah, but the Pacers, like in a 7-game series, a ball bounces here or there, they got a puncher's chance against Cleveland in a 7-game series. How many teams in the East are there that you would say it doesn't matter what happens, the Pacers are likely not beating them in 7 games?
I think there's only one. I think it's the Celtics, and the Celtics are just nasty, right? Top 5 in both offense and defense is correct. They actually might be top 2 in both offense and defense, which is just ridiculous to say. Their only real criticism, especially of late, has been their clutch play. But, yeah, they're currently first in offense and second in defense, which is just ridiculous. And their top 6 is as good as it gets in the NBA. I think they're the only team that I would not give the Pacers at least a chance against. I mean, the Bucks are playing better. They have a new coach. They have better personnel now to match up with the Pacers. But we've seen that the Pacers can handle what they have and can dominate their bench. They've beaten the Cavs twice. They've beaten the Knicks twice. They've beaten the Sixers with Embiid twice. They've beaten the Heat. Like, I don't think there's anybody you'd say outside of Boston they can't beat if they play really well or play their game.
You want to know one?
Oh, well, go for it. Let me hear it.
You tell me if you disagree here. There's one to me that is just a terrible matchup.
Can I guess who you're going to say?
Yes.
You're going to say the Knicks.
No.
Wow. Then I don't know who you're going to say.
This is a team that does not wow you, to use your term that you just used there. And I've watched them against Indiana a couple times this year. I think maybe twice. That does not a season make, I realize. But I love the way they're built because they just have really good size and length, to use a common draft night term, at multiple positions. And I think they're a terrible matchup for Indiana. The Orlando Magic.
Yeah, that game in Indy, and I can't remember when now, I think it was November, was very illuminating in that was, still to this day, the worst game the Pacers have had this season. Yeah, November 19th. People keep talking about it when they lose these ugly games to the Spurs, like, oh, this is their worst loss of the season. I say, no, it was the Magic game in November. They were down 40 in the first half, right? Like, that, clearly there is some matchup difficulty there. Halliburton played that night. That was his first real stinker of the season. So I think what you're saying is true, that from a raw matchup perspective, they are as tough as it gets for the Pacers in terms of their front court's huge. Really, their back court is huge, right? Like, sometimes some of their studs are in it at the 2 spot, but they're just not consistent enough on offense for me to say that the Pacers can't beat them in a series. They're 23rd in offense, and all the teams below them are, tanking, craptastic teams that aren't any good outside of the Houston Rockets. So I'll be interested to see in the playoffs how a team like that has almost no shooting, right? Can they score enough, right? And of course, if they can stop a lot of players and keep games close, they'll have a chance. But I think there's a requisite level of offense you need to win series. I also think there's a requisite level of defense you need, and the Pacers don't have that. But I think for the Magic Pacers matchup, I think is tough for the Pacers, as we've seen twice already this season and again on Sunday. But I think they could beat them in a series just because the Magic can't score that much. I think that's a big mark on their resume.
Tony, I'm not going to lie to you. Tanking craptastic is how my career's been described on several occasions in the last decade.
I'm in public, too. I can't believe nobody looked at me for that.
I'm very familiar with said term.
I'm normally not a fan of saying tanking at all, so it's been quite the time to break out the vernacular.
Additionally, I would throw out the Orlando Magic as well for best song in the NBA. The Orlando Magic song, and a great follow on TikTok as well. It's just catchy. Can't help myself. Building off of Jake's question, Tony East is our guest. You can find him on Sports Illustrated and Locked On Pacers. Of the teams, let's say 7 through 4, is there anybody that's uncatchable for the Pacers in terms of the final month and a half of the season, with everybody kind of so stacked together? Any team you look at and say, you know what, with how grueling the Pacers schedule is the rest of the way, they can't catch these teams?
I don't know if the Pacers schedule is like so grueling, but the Magic's schedule, for those who haven't seen it, they just wrapped up a 6-game stretch where they played Detroit, Atlanta, Brooklyn, Utah, Detroit, and Charlotte in 6 games. and the Wizards, actually. So 7 games of that schedule. They have 2 tough ones coming, and then they immediately go back to playing the Nets, the Raptors, the Hornets, and the Pelicans for their next 5. Like, their schedule is so easy in March. It gets harder late in the season, but that makes them hard to catch because unlike the Pacers, their high isn't as high. They're not as good against over 500 teams. In fact, they're pretty terrible against over 500 teams, but they clean up against the teams they should be 22-6 against below 500 teams, right? That's going to make them hard to catch when they have an easy schedule the rest of the way. These other teams, the Heat are playing really well, but they don't have the consistent profile. Their schedule gets a little tougher, although it's pretty easy. And the Sixers and Knicks are so banged up, although it sounds like Jalen Brunson could be back soon, that I think it's feasible for the Pacers to catch any of those teams. I think the Sixers and Knicks are most likely. But the Magic seem, the way they're playing, they've won 5 in a row, 8 of their last 10, and their schedule is like comically easy. For the reasons Jake described, their defense and their length makes them a pretty high floor team. I think it's going to be hard for the Pacers to catch them, just given what their schedule is for the next couple weeks.
Tony East, our guest, Pacers Timberwolves tonight. Tony, last one here about this game tonight because I find this interesting. I said yesterday that I think one of the luxuries of having Pascal Siakam on this roster is that it allows for Halliburton to kind of right himself without it completely, to using your term, tanking the team or bringing it down, right? You have somebody that can kind of carry things while Halliburton gets settled again. But are we seeing any chance of kind of a transformation where this goes from clearly being a Halliburton team to being a 1-1A?
I think they're trying to have it transition to that, and it's tricky because they need to win, right? For the reasons we just talked about. There's teams around them in the standings they would like to catch. But, for their longest-term success, maybe for their postseason success should they make it, having it be 1-1A is better, right? It's more effective. And you saw in that Pelicans game before they went on the road trip more specifically, I think that was the game that was most obvious to me. Siakam with the ball, Halliburton as a screener, or Halliburton as a fake screener, or him just being the closest guy off the ball that the defense has to worry about. And then let Siakam create, let him pass, let him be that kind of guy. And I think that's what they hope can be the case. And I think they have had to fall into that because without the shooters that they traded away at the deadline, Halliburton is not their best shooter. They need to use him as that off-ball guy. But, looking at the numbers you've seen since that game in Toronto right before the break, you've seen Siakam have games of 7, 6, 5, and 6 assists. Like, clearly they're trying to work him in as someone who can steady the ship when they're both out there and be reliable and even run the show a little bit when Halliburton's not out there. I think they're trying to figure that out, figure out how the pairing works in that way. And it might be awkward at times to see Halliburton be off the ball because he's so good at it. But I think it's kind of necessary work in progress kind of stuff to be the best version of this roster, and they don't have a lot of time to show no progress if that's how they're going to operate. But I think that is the ultimate goal for them, is that's how they can operate together. Can I ask you guys a question before I get kicked out of here?
Yes, sir.
How do you guys decide who wears the white headphones and the black headphones?
Excellent question, and thank you for asking it. And also thank you for watching the YouTube chat, which is very impressive, and you can see my attention to detail when you do. Truth be told, we got ordered not too long ago, I don't know, like 6 months ago, because, okay, you really asked, I'm going to go there. Behind the curtain, nobody's listening. We already discussed that because you were dropping, naughty words on the radio, and nobody said anything, so nobody's listening. Kevin and Andy in the morning, do you ever do their morning program?
I do, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I got news for you. That Andy fella steals headphones like there's no tomorrow. I'm talking kleptomania. And so as a result of that, we kept going through headphones in here. And a lot of them were like Krakow headphones from like 1984, went with old Walkmans, things like that. And so I just decided, you know what, I'm going to go out and buy my own headphones. And I thought, well, what headphones can I buy that are going to look different than everybody else's? And so and I went to Best Buy and they were the cheapest. They had white headphones, and so I bought those, and it's very apparent that they're mine. So I actually bring my own little, I have my own little headphone carrier here. I also have my own little windscreen, Tony, since you asked, the little foam thing that goes over the microphone, because this is the same microphone that Andy uses, and by listening to him, I'm thinking he probably expectorates quite a lot. So as a result of that, I use my own windscreen as well. So thank you for asking.
I also bought my own headphones, since we're apparently flexing about that, so there we go.
Yeah,
this
there you
is
go.
the inside baseball that I wanted.
I'm trying to get sponsored by Beats. That's what I'm doing here.
How do you, and the standing, you weren't standing the first time I checked, but now you are. How do you decide that?
That is also an excellent question, Tony, if you don't mind me saying so. Not only am I 51, But I'm also kind of the Halliburton of the program here, so I'm carrying a lot on these shoulders, right? So my back gets a little stiff when I'm sitting, and then also Andy this is the chair that he uses, and I don't know what he's doing, if he's got osteoporosis or what's going on, but he has it set up as such that it's like one of those Acorn stair lift chairs, and so every once in a while, just to relieve my back, I have to stand up, and it also allows me, for my slight ADD, to mix things up.
Sometimes I
bit.
stand as well to mess with Jake and Eddie.
That's right.
Because they get perplexed whenever I stand up.
And
as
then
well.
Eddie, when I stand up, has to hit a button very quickly to change the camera view on the YouTube thing. So clearly you're watching right now. So here, I'll give you a little wave.
It's up there.
Sorry, up there because I'm standing. And I would like to also thank, for what it's worth, my buddy at Klipsch gave me some headsets a while ago, but I use those just for movies on airplanes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
the inside baseball I wanted.
Anything else?
No,
That's it for this week's TWIB notes from around the American League. Next week on This Week in Baseball. Tony, we appreciate it. We'll see you tonight, all right?
You got it. See you guys.
Right, Tony East. Those are the kind of questions I like. I could talk about what goes on in here all day long.
You see, I thought it was just so you could get a glimpse to see if my head's gotten bigger or smaller.
Well, I don't know that.
That's because you just get thrilled when people ask about you.
I love me some me, man. That is my favorite subject. People used to ask me in school, what's your favorite subject? Well, that's easy. Me.
Crime and violence in Indy.
Hell yeah. Here we go. This week in baseball, baby. Now, here's what's interesting. This is called Gathering Crowds. People think that's the theme to This Week in Baseball. Inside baseball being a term now people use for too esoteric. That's actually the closing theme. The theme at the beginning of Inside Baseball is this one here, which was also a popular game show called, I believe, Jackpot, maybe? You know, Mel Allen would start out, you know, hot team in the East, you know, and then the highlight. Coming up on This Week in Baseball, and then into it. Listen, those things, that and baseball cards made baseball such a massive sport for so many of the years that it was. And, you know, I'd love to see baseball get back to that, but we shall see whether or not Major League Baseball, because they've got great players, great young players. You guys, I know, are huge baseball fans, and it was a really easy way for kids back in the day to follow baseball. Speaking of kids, one of them stole the headlines last night at the Butler Xavier game in Hinkle Fieldhouse. Now, Jimmy, you explained this to me. They have a kid, they bring somebody out of the crowd to hit a full court putt, right?
Correct. I don't think it's exclusively kids, but yes, this is a tradition at Butler games. It has to go
through like the little arch that basically looks like what Tom and Jerry had, right?
Correct. Yeah, Jerry's house basically is where you got to throw it.
And so this is what it sounded like last night when Matthew Adams lined up for his putt from 94 feet away or something.
A massive highlight. How about this kid? 94 feet away.
I just said that.
Has to try to squeeze it into a small little hole, and he's got it for $5,000. That's unbelievable.
That's unbelievable.
Now, here's the thing. What are the odds of you being able to do that?
I mean, I would like me actually
just
zero.
I mean, it's the first time anybody's done it, right?
To my knowledge,
you got to get more than $5,000, right?
I think you got to up that price of something.
Joining us now on the program, the star of the night last night, Matthew Adams. Matthew, have you come back down to earth yet?
Nope.
All right, let's begin with this. How avid a golfer are you?
Not that much. Once a summer.
Putt? You ever play putt?
Yeah.
So what was the thought process? Like, how did you do it? The next guy that's going to try to win $5,000, what's your advice?
Just give it a whack.
I mean, how'd you keep it so straight, though? It was unbelievable.
I have no idea.
Okay, now, here's the other question. When you look back on it and you think to yourself, like when you see the video, because I'm sure you've watched it 1,000 times, right? Are you happy with, like, the flex that you had afterwards? Do you wish you would have been, like, more demonstrative? I thought you played it pretty cool. What was your assessment of the way that you reacted to it?
I thought I did pretty well.
Now, do you wish you would have gotten more than $5,000, Matthew? Do you want me to speak up on your behalf here? $5,000. What are you going to do with the $5,000?
Probably buy some shoes.
Now you go to Matthew. You go to school where?
St. Pius.
St. Pius. Okay, right over there at 71st, and you know that Keystone Sports Review's open right across the street. You can go over and get some wings to celebrate. 71st and Keystone, St. Pius. You're in what grade, Matthew? 7th. Okay. Do you got a girlfriend?
Nope.
Okay, good. That'll make it easier to hold on to that $5,000, which is a good thing, right? And you come from a sports family. What is your favorite sport?
Basketball.
Basketball. Okay, and you don't golf, but you have your dad, and then you have, is it 3 uncles? Is that right? There's like 4 out. Your grandfather was the head of officiating for the NCAA. You're aware of this fact, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And here's the thing, Matthew, your grandfather, who I knew when I was actually a youngster about your age, because I lived in the same neighborhood as your dad and your grandfather, and your grandfather was a great guy who loved sports and absolutely would have been thrilled, Matthew, to see you hit that putt. And that's what was exciting for me about it. And I know that the connection that your dad used to do at a lot of Butler games, so was it extra special to you, not just to win the $5,000, but to do it at Hinkle Fieldhouse and Butler? That all had to be pretty cool, right?
Yep.
Who's your favorite athlete, Matthew? Are you a Tiger Woods guy?
Steph Curry.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say Steph Curry. Are you a Pacers fan?
Yeah.
Are you a Colts fan?
Yep.
Now, what shoes are you going to buy?
Some Yeezys.
Now, are your parents going to make you put any of this into the bank?
I'd imagine.
Okay, here's my other question. You had like a hype man. When you hit the putt last night, you had another kid with a camera that was going absolutely bonkers, and I thought for a second it might have knocked you out. Now, who was that fella?
Luke Lehman, he's one of my best friends.
Okay, and Luke is your grade, is that right?
No, he's one above.
I was going to say, because he's a lot bigger than you are, no offense, but you know what I mean? Like, he looked bigger than you. Luke went absolutely bonkers. Does he get any of the money? Because he acted like he gets all of it.
May have to give him a little just to take me to the game.
Oh, so he's the one that took you to the game?
Yep.
Now, how'd you get picked out of the crowd? When did you know that you were going to be hitting this putt?
My dad got it and then said he didn't want to do it, and probably 10 minutes into the game told me I was going to do it.
Unbelievable. All right, well, Matthew, I'll tell you what, congratulations. Enjoy the new pair of Yeezys and then put the rest in the bank, okay? Give a little bit to the Lehman kid. You know, I know the Lehmans
right.
too. He'll happily take the cash. That's cool. And then but enjoy being a celebrity, and you know, you don't have a girlfriend, so you know, enjoy everything that comes with this, right? Let the ladies know.
Yep.
All right, Matthew, we appreciate it. Matthew Adams, who last night hit the big putt. I'm telling you what, just whack it. Maybe it is like, maybe people overthink it when they come out to do those things. They do the same thing at hockey matches or hockey games, right? People come out and they don't want to fall on the ice, and nobody ever hits it, ever, right? What would you have done at that age if you won $5,000?
I would have taken a lap. Are you kidding me? Yeah.
But what would you have done with the money? When you were 12, what would you have done with the money?
My parents would have made me save it. Maybe I could negotiate for, like he did, a pair of shoes or something like that. Maybe a new video game console. Get a new Xbox.
$5,000? I mean, don't look a gift horse in the mouth, but come on.
But earlier you were saying the price should be higher. I don't understand.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what I'm saying. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, but come on. Because usually something like that is like, if it had been a college kid, it's usually for like a semester's tuition,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Which at Butler is like $140,000. I'm kidding. But still, like, it's more than $5,000, right?
Depends if you're out of state or not.
I think, here's the thing. I think Matthew needs some NIL representation here. He needs to go to Dartmouth, join the basketball team, and become unionized.
I'm sure they'll take more members on there.
Get a little more money out of that, right?
I wonder if because it looked good. Like, it looked good the whole way. And you could tell from his reaction, both in the video and obviously if you were there in person last night. I mean, it was precision.
It was unbelievable. I mean, right where it needed to go. Now, his grandfather's John Adams, who was the director of officiating for the NCAA for many years and worked within the world of sports in many capacities. We lost John within the last year. But a couple of years ago, if you're ever driving on Keystone, at the corner of Kessler and Keystone, there is a single grave that is there that is that of a Revolutionary War soldier. And when they started to develop the Glendale area, they kept that. There was a small family plot there, cemetery. They kept that one there because of the history of it. And that grave has fencing around it and then a big American flag. And I just happened to notice one time when I was driving, the American flag had fallen. The pole had fallen over. And I sent a tweet about it like, hey, I don't even know who oversees this, but this should be taken care of. John Adams saw my tweet. I knew him very peripherally because I lived in a subdivision growing up where my parents still live, where the Adams lived for, when I was growing up, and his children, who are obviously Matthew's dad is one of them, lived in the neighborhood also. But John Adams saw my tweet and was on like a Washington Township constable board or, something along those lines, and sent me a DM that was like, I'm on this right now. And literally, like a week later, the most beautiful, like full standing American flag and Indiana State flagpole right there. I mean,
wow.
he took care of it instantly, right? Now, the only thing I will say, and I didn't want to tell Matthew this because I didn't want to embarrass him, but one of those Adams kids, when I was a kid growing up, and they were probably 5 years younger than there were, I think, 4 of them. One of them never wore pants. Like you'd be riding your bike through the neighborhood, and there was always like one 4-year-old kid running around the street and in the neighborhood and everything with no pants on. He had like an aversion to. I didn't want to let Matthew know that his dad might have been a streaker when he was.
Did you let the Adams family know?
I did. I remember actually when John Adams is the one that was closest to my age, the son, John Adams. I think I said to him once, I'm like, you got one of your brothers, you got to get some pants on that kid. Always walking around, running around the neighborhood. He was a bow-legged little kid running around all the time with no pants on. It was, you know what I mean?
I thought that story was going to be, they used to egg the Query house all the time. But
well, they, I always thought that was a badge of honor. Like somebody blew up my parents' mailbox once, and I thought, well, that's cool. They don't do that to dorks' houses.
Hey, it's JMV, and for 6 months you've been hearing me.
The Jay Cook Plays of the Day.
This is me, all right? I'm not a athlete. This is my way. This is how I win.
Today's Plays of the Day, conference tournaments rolling right along with a full slate of action. Here are the Plays of the Day. In the Horizon League quarterfinals, we'll take Wisconsin Green Bay to win the money line at home against Wisconsin at Milwaukee. In the Patriot League, we will lay 5.5 on American as they host Bucknell. Missouri Valley Conference play, give me Illinois State on the money line over Evansville. In the Sun Belt, this one basically a pick, and we'll take the Thundering Herd of Marshall over Georgia State. The Atlantic Sun, 2 plays there, will lay 6 with Stetson as they host Jacksonville. Jacksonville, you may recall, upset Eastern Kentucky, the regular season champion of the Atlantic Sun earlier this week. Over in the Ohio Valley, we'll scoop the 3 on Tennessee State. They take on Western Illinois as they travel on the road. And Austin P will take them on the money line over North Alabama. Eddie has no plays.
When you say scoop, you mean +3, right?
Yes, I do. Those are your plays of the day. You only lay points. I don't understand why that's so hard.
How much investigating are you doing on things like Austin P?
Like very casual. Very casual
Which means
investigation.
I'm just throwing my money right down the crapper. I have no idea.
Well, how else do you think that they give the money to people that need it, like for J.G. Wentworth? It's from guys like me.
A fool and his money are lucky to find each other. Is that what Gordon Gekko said? You walk around like a blind man without a cane, pal.
Greed is good, man. John, speaking of greed is good, if you hit that putt at Butler, wouldn't you expect more than $5,000?
What's that again?
The kid that hit the full-length putt at the Butler game. He got $5,000.
I think they won $10,000. Somebody did that at Indiana State earlier this year.
Yeah, that's what I mean, right?
Like $10,000, I think.
And Butler's a private school.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, what are we doing?
More than $5,000? Yes, absolutely.
He's buying a pair of Yeezys, he said.
Yeah.
What would you have bought when you were 12 years old?
12 years old.
If you won $5,000 and your parents said you can buy one thing, what would it
be? Probably 12 years old. Well, a bunch of Converse posters. Yep. Those are the great Converse posters back then. Like Big Mac, the legendary George McGinnis had a Converse poster, Big Mac. So,
do you remember the poster of the Pacers poster that said, I can't remember the wording of it, but it was Vern Fleming, Wayman Tisdale, and who would have been the third? It might have been just the two of them, and it said like the Gold Brothers because they were the Olympic gold medalists. And you can see Market Square below.
I don't remember that. I just remember that time was Pacer Pride.
Pacer
the pride of Indiana.
Pacer Pride, the pride of Indiana.
You know, it's weird. We probably
had pride to watch a team that was 20-62.
Yeah. Devin Durant, man. Devin Durant and Bill Garnett.
Rick Steppy.
Was Donnie there yet?
No, Donnie got here. Donnie came in 85 as an assistant, and then after the 85 season, they cleaned house, and they were interviewing Billy Cunningham for the general manager position, who recommended that they interview Donnie. And he became the GM in 86, yeah. And then he drafted Chuck.
So Donnie was not – he was a part of the frozen envelope that the Knicks got with Ewing?
I think he came actually after that season began.
Have you ever asked him if that's true?
Never asked him about that.
Have Shannon ask him.
I will.
Say, hey, JMV wants to know if that envelope was really frozen.
I think it was a bent corner, don't you?
Yeah. I always heard it was cold.
Talking about the 85 lottery with the Knicks for people that are not familiar with Ewing. And
they got Ewing, and the Pacers got Stipo.
Correct.
That was not
No. They got Ewing, and the Pacers got Tisdale.
Tisdale, right.
They got Stipo after they lost the Ralph Sampson coin.
Right. Yeah. Stipo, that's exactly right.
John, you got a big one lined up next?
We do here. Kravitz going to come on. We'll talk about Woodson. You guys spent a lot of time on Woodson today.
We did.
I think we all kind of knew that he was going to get a fourth year, but you kind of do just prolong the agony a little here, don't you? I mean, is that what we call kicking the can down the road a little bit? I would guess. They are playing better, though.
They are.
I thought they played well last night at Minnesota. Minnesota have been pretty good. Kravitz going to join me. Daenerys going to join me. Chappell and P.J. Thompson, who's the offensive coordinator for the Boilermakers.
We had him on a couple weeks ago. He's great.
Yeah, and he is. He's going to call on the way down to the Pacer game tonight. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right, John's up next. We'll be back with you at noon tomorrow. Thanks for listening, everybody.
The Ride with JMV.
I completely understand why they had to trade Buddy Hield.